Okay. Happy Easter, everybody. How is everybody? I hope everyone's having a really good weekend. Obviously, a lot's been happening in the world of sport. Uh, Obviously, Liverpool were hammered, absolutely hammered, in the FA Cup quarter final by Man City at the Etihad yesterday. Haaland with a hat trick. Pressure mounting on Arnie Slot. That they're going to have a trophyless season. So that's going to be really interesting to see how the Liverpool board deal with that. Obviously, we've seen some managerial changes. De Zerbi has been appointed by the Spurs board following Igor Tudor's departure. And some Spurs fan groups have been highly critical of the appointment of De Zerbi at the club in regards to his outspoken support for Mason Greenwood when he was Marseille manager in France. A lot of fan groups have voiced their criticism and are threatening to boycott. And this is a club that is in a relegation fight, so that's really interesting. Obviously, also we've seen the fine and punishments handed down to Chelsea for their financial misdeeds under the Abramovich era that have come to light, and that's divided fans in general in regards to the punishment that Chelsea received. Considering that other clubs have had financial breaches and allegations of financial misdeeds and have been docked points and punished differently. This is not the first time that Chelsea have had a punishment handed down to them involving fines and transfer embargoes in recent years. This is an ongoing thing to do with the Abramovich ownership in that era. We've also got the ongoing situation with Man City that's still not resolved and is dragging on now, which I think is doing more harm to the image of the Premier League and English football the longer it goes on without a resolution. We know UEFA obviously initially found them guilty of their rule breaches and punished them. And then due to the Court of Arbitration for Sport getting involved, the punishment was reduced because of statute of limitations under UEFA rules. The Premier League does not have those limitations, so we know they've already had a punishment. It's dragging on unnecessarily long, and that's frustrating football fans in general. And there's that subplot. We've also in rugby league seen the sacking of Anthony Seibold by the Manly Sea Eagles and his replacement with Kieran Foran. And the team responds with a thumping win the first game that he's been replaced. So there's a lot going on. We're going to hear an announcement in regards to the NRL and Super League investment at some point in May, probably around the Challenge Cup final, of which tickets are on sale. Tickets are on sale for the Challenge Cup final. It'll be interesting to see the attendance at Wembley this year. Attendances have been struggling for some time. Other rugby league news, Willie Peters will leave Hull KR at the end of the season. He's going to be taking up the PNG job, PNG Chiefs, when they come in as an expansion team into the NRL. So this will be his last season in the Super League. There is also talk of who the next England Rugby League head coach will be. Brad Arthur's name has been floated around. Obviously, the World Cup is at the end of the season in October and November. Brad Arthur's name has come up into the conversation, but there's not a lot of high-quality coaches available who have coached at representative level or at a high level who could take the role. So the RFL will see who ends up getting appointed to the England head coaching role for the World Cup, and if they are given a long-term contract or a short-term contract. So that's also bubbling in the background. I would also expect an announcement to be made, again, probably around the Challenge Cup final. It's sometime in May. So that'd be really interesting to see who gets announced to replace Sean Wayne as the England head coach. There's not a lot of available coaches out there. Brad Arthur has put his name into the conversation. He's currently the Leeds Rhinos head coach. It's going to be interesting to see if they decide to go down that route. So there's that bubbling in the pipeline. Obviously, Major League Baseball has got its 2026 season underway. This, could be a make or break season with the ongoing uncertainty surrounding the CBA negotiations. The CBA with Major League Baseball expires on December the 2nd. So while it's April the 5th, as we're doing this live stream, the clock is actually ticking in regards to the CBA negotiations. And we know from the rhetoric coming out from the players is they are adamant they don't want a salary cap. They are digging their heels in. And we could see a lockout to start the 2027 Major League Baseball season. And this is coming at a crucial time where the NBA is actively looking at expansion. The NHL, I would think the expansion process with the NHL is probably going to get geared up in the next year or two. The NFL has got its next media rights deal, which will be announced at some point within the next year or two when they finally announce, because it expires in 3 years' time, and according to reports, it's going to explode massively. We know that the Milwaukee Brewers are losing money very publicly. They've announced that they are in real trouble financially. So we know that there are teams posting losses in Major League Baseball. So this is going to be quite interesting to see what ultimately comes of the negotiations in regards to the CBA. There is bad blood between the players and the league. This stems back even before the pandemic and the shutdown. The return to play negotiations were very, very fraught back in 2020. There were threats of a player strike then. They ultimately did resume play. They did play the 2021 season. At the end of the 2021 season, we had a lockout that went into 2022. A CBA was negotiated. The season started a little bit later than it was scheduled to. But even then, there's been no move to negotiate. Really, the rhetoric coming out over the last couple of years in regards to the CBA negotiations or CBA renewal or extension has been highly negative in regards to the players and the league. The owners want a salary cap. Rob Manfred is under pressure to try and achieve that and try and get a negotiated settlement and prevent a lockout, but it's looking highly unlikely. In regards to the NHL and expansion, I think the expansion process begins before the end of the current CBA in 2030. I think the expansion process will formally begin and announcements will be made. I think the league will go to 36 teams quite quickly. We've seen the success of the recent expansion with Vegas and Seattle, which is where the NBA is pretty much nailed on to going. Now that those cities have NBA level arenas that are available to them. One of the reasons why the Supersonics left Seattle was the state of the arena. They got moved. Now that KeyBank has been turned to Climate Pledge and completely refurbed and brought up to a modern standard for the Seattle Kraken, it's looking highly likely that Seattle will get an NBA franchise back. Vegas is also another location that the NBA is looking at. The NBA also has problems, but not on the same level as Major League Baseball. I think Major League Baseball is in a very dangerous position for a multitude of reasons. And a lockout could seriously, damage the image of the league, and it's already got an aging fan base, demographic. Younger fans are switching off. They're turning their back on the sport and the league, and they're choosing other sports. We've seen the growth of ice hockey and association football in the US is growing faster than baseball. More young people are playing those sports and engaging. More families are engaging with those sports. So there is that. With that backdrop of what's happening in US sports, obviously FIFA released their latest batch of tickets, their final batch of tickets for the World Cup. and the prices are astronomical. And so there's that debate around dynamic pricing and how this World Cup, FIFA are the ones really in control of ticket prices. The prices have been badly received. We're talking over 8,000, nearly £9,000 or euros for tickets. So that's over nearly $11,000 US for tickets for the final, for example, group stage and other knockout games. We're talking at least 700 to 800 US dollars on average, although there are some cheaper tickets available. Tickets aren't selling out. From various reports I've seen, local fans are feeling priced out, and there's a lot of anger from fan groups in Europe and South America in regards to the ticket pricing strategy that FIFA have employed for this tournament. This comes on the back of UEFA releasing their plans for ticket prices for Euro 2028, and the golfing cost is ridiculous. UEFA have really made sure that the tickets are affordable. Now, I'm expecting change in regards to ticket prices and some fluctuation, but dynamic pricing isn't really a thing in Europe. There is legislation restricting how much prices can fluctuate, whereas in the US and Canada, no such legislation exists, and so therefore it is highly, highly expensive. Yeah, we are seeing pushback as a result, and fans just there doesn't seem to be the same build up to a World Cup, the same kind of energy in fan groups and in countries in regards to this tournament. There doesn't seem to be that energy and that positivity in regards to the World Cup this time around. I mean, there was a lot of criticism of Qatar. There was a lot of criticism of Russia. I felt Qatar was an average tournament. I don't think it was the best. It wasn't the worst. Russia was a pretty decent tournament for the quality of play we saw on the field and the atmosphere, the weather conditions. Attendances were good. The games were entertaining. There was a good energy in regards to fans and participating nations. This time round, there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of criticism before a ball's been kicked. We've seen a couple of test tournaments like the Copa America and the Club World Cup, where there was a lot of issues at US venues, empty seats, problems with accessibility of stadiums, the playing surfaces not being great, security issues, hold-ups, delays, weather delays especially, transportation infrastructure not really being that great, accessibility not being that great. And ultimately, the organisers of the Club World Cup were forced to start slashing ticket prices to try and get fans to attend games. And stadiums didn't sell out, and there was a lot of negativity around the tournament last year, which I think they haven't learned from. They doubled down on their mistakes. So it's really interesting to see, what ultimately happens. Now, every team now officially qualified that can qualify. We'll see if Iran do participate. Obviously, there's been the threats of withdrawal by the Iranian FA. There's no security guarantees. There's a lot of politics involved there. So any country could technically replace them. UAE, I think, if we're going by Asian qualifying, how that panned out would be the next nation up to be called upon. But any nation could potentially FIFA could select any nation. We haven't seen a situation like that since 1992 with the former Yugoslavia not taking part in Euro 92 and being replaced by Denmark, who ironically went on to win the whole bloody tournament, which was the ultimate irony. So there's a lot of unknowns in that regard, a lot of unknowns. And there's been a lot of criticism over the stadiums selected, and as I say, the accessibility of the stadiums for fans, the cost for fans, hotel costs, flights, and with what's happening with the crisis in the Gulf, with fuel costs. Some airlines are reducing the number of flights. There are fuel shortages. and restrictions in some countries. Prices are going through the roof. So who knows what could happen come June and July. It's a very tense situation. There is some politics involved. Politics and sport is never a good mix. And we've seen that with this World Cup before any matches get played. So it's a very complex situation. As I say, I don't think fans from Europe and South America will travel in the same numbers as previous tournaments. And with the visa backlog and visa restrictions and visa issues that a lot of nations are facing in order to enter the US, I can see this being a poorly attended tournament and not reaching the levels expected and predicted by FIFA to begin with. So we'll see how it all pans out. Obviously, with what's happening in the Gulf, that's impacted F1 with both Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, their Grand Prix being cancelled by the FIA, which now means F1 has no races in April. Which I think has a silver lining because there's been a lot of criticism of the regulations, and obviously we saw that very serious accident at Suzuka, which has raised concerns about the safety and the current engine regs. Drivers aren't happy. Max Verstappen has been highly critical of F1 and the regs. I mean, drivers were being very critical of the regulations long before they changed. And Max Verstappen is threatening to leave F1 for endurance racing and GT racing, and I think that is a big step for the multi-world champion to basically threaten. F1's got their regs all wrong. I haven't watched F1 for years, I will admit. I stopped enjoying it quite some time ago, even before Liberty Media took full control from Bernie Ecclestone. A lot of the issues stem from some of the decisions Bernie Ecclestone took about 15 years ago in the process of Liberty Media taking over the promotion and running of F1. Liberty Media have also bought a stake in MotoGP, so make of that what you will. And F1 should be one of the pinnacles of motorsport, and it's starting to become an absolute circus and very unenjoyable. I don't know how anyone can actually enjoy it personally. When the drivers have to artificially, you've got push to pass and, engine management, fuel save tire. Just let them race. Let them race on the ragged edge. It's the best entertainment you can get when you've got all these little, what I would call quirky rules, to artificially create some kind of parity, and you're coming up with new rules all the time. That generally says to me that sport is not in a good space when you've got to bring in some of these false parity rules in. That's a warning sign that all is not well. It's like cricket with the 100. Bringing in new formats and constant rule changes is generally not a good thing. Sport should obviously naturally evolve where you tweak the rules over a slow period of time. That's generally a healthy sport with good fan engagement. When you are constantly chopping and changing rules and bringing what I call artificial parity all the time, and constant rule changes and gimmicky kind of rules, that is to try and inject some kind of action into a sport or to liven things up. That's generally not a good sign. Not going to lie, it's not a good sign. That's generally quite a worrying situation of things. That's a sporting crisis. I've been critical of cricket, for example, with the 100. That's a gimmick. Rugby union's been very reactive in a lot of its constant, what they would call law changes in around the tackle area, yellow cards, red cards, hybrid kind of 10 minute, 20 minute. It's just, it makes the sport, in my opinion, less appealing, less entertaining. You could also argue rugby league's going the same way a little bit with some of their new rules or rule variations and rule tweaks. where they keep adjusting interpretations and bringing in new rules. That's a worry. And there's a lot of sports that are constantly altering their structures, and it's putting it's turning off a lot of fans. I think that's a big thing. Is when fans feel that the sport's changing too much, they lose a connectivity with it. You could argue ticket prices, for example, are pricing fans out. Working class fans being priced out. You could argue VAR, for example, in its interpretation and its implementation in football has been done poorly. I think the concept back in 2017 and 2018, there was a good concept there. It needed fine tuning, but the basis of it was good, and they've gone wrong over the last 8 years. I think we can all agree on that. I think VAR has been badly handled over the last 8 years since its test period and implementation. The offside rule completely needs an overhaul. It's not a good thing, and generally speaking, fans are very frustrated. They're not enjoying the experience at the top level. There's a cost attached with that, and some leagues have become a bit cautious about continuing with the use of it. Some leagues are trying different rule variations to see if that improves the situation. But I do think the quality of play we are seeing now is of a lower quality than what it was 15, 20 years ago. I think that's a fair criticism that I have of the current state of association football. I would say the same of rugby union as well. I would say the same about several sports. I think are of a lower quality, more athletic, yes, but of a lower quality, where we're overcoaching, we're sucking the flair and spontaneity out of creative players, and we're just coaching athletes into systems, and we're shoehorning into systems rather than having flexibility. We're not encouraging, especially in team sports, for example, the players to problem solve on the fly. You'll see when tactically, for example, things aren't going a certain team's way, they're constantly looking towards the coach or the manager for instruction rather than problem solving, and playing what's in front of them and working out a solution. Why that individual player is marking them up better, why they can't when they're attacking, overcome a defensive system, and vice versa. Why a defensive system isn't working necessarily. We're sort of we've lost a little, especially in football. I think the flair aspect has been sucked out. It's far too overly rigidly structured. A lot of coaches don't have a plan B, for example, and a lot of players are too cautious. I wouldn't say cautious, but it's ingrained in the coaching that you have to follow the instruction of the coach. You don't. The flair's been sucked out of it. I think the enjoyment for the fans been sucked out of it, in part because of the cost, in part because of VAR. The spontaneity of the atmosphere in a stadium has been diminished somewhat. So there's things in play that warrant consideration and discussion. Yesterday, Folkestone Invicta won the Eastern Premier Division title at St Albans next season for the first time they will play in the National League South. Well, this is interesting because obviously you've got to start at the bottom of the pyramid somewhere. And it's very interesting because I forgot to mention this. #United have asked the Isthmian League to relegate them because they're losing too many games and therefore they're losing too many subscribers and followers on social media. Who knew that their egos would be hurt because they're not good enough? But no, Folkestone, I mean, look, a healthy league structure, you need to have promotion and relegation. You need to have the opportunity to achieve a higher level and aspire to a higher level. And look, the National League system is good quality. It's good quality. There's some good players playing in the National League and National League North and South. Some of them have got Football League experience. It's also a good place for younger players to learn their trade. some of whom may have been released by academies for a variety of reasons. Some are out on loan to gain some first team experience, and so it's a great development platform. So eventually, those players will end up playing at a higher level. Some great Premier League players like Jamie Vardy ended up in the National League system at some point. Ricky Lambert's another one. Grant Holt's another one. Ian Wright was playing non-league until Palace found him. He was a late bloomer. So the non-league is a great development system as well for young players, and good scouting. You can find some really good players at the lower levels of the game who could play at a higher level in the game, and it's a great place for young coaches also to develop and hone their coaching skills a little bit, and also gain experience. The problem is there's not a lot of money at that level. Cockfosters. I'm sorry. Whenever I'm on the London Underground, and I hear cockfosters, I just laugh. I don't know what it is about the English language, but we do have some very peculiar place names. Look, it's as I say, we've reached that point now where we're at the pointy end of the season, and cup finals are being played, promotions are being secured, teams are fighting relegation. This is the business end of the season, and we will see obviously who gets promoted from what league. So Folkestone have gone up to the highest level they've ever been at. I could do a video on them, I think. And obviously, some poor teams are going to get relegated. And of course, Tottenham and West Ham are in that battle to avoid relegation right now. And West Ham have a quarter final in the FA Cup to play later on today. But there is that pointy end of the season. These are games that still matter. There's prize money to be divided, the TV money for where you finish in your respective league position. So the goal is qualify for Europe if you're a Premier League club. I mean, look, Hearts could win the Scottish Premier League. For the first time in a long time, which would break the old firm dominance which has persisted since the mid-80s. So there's a lot of teams are winning their first trophy in a very long time, like last season with Palace and Newcastle, amongst other teams that won their first silverware in a long time, or first silverware ever. And other teams are competing for their first league titles in a long time. So there's some good stories coming out of football, but also there's the frustrations with the VAR system. There's frustrations with ticket prices. There's frustrations with the offside rule. Quality of refereeing comes up a lot. We're seeing that not just in association football, but we're seeing it in Major League Baseball with the new ABS system, where umpires have been called out for not being very good and making blunders, and the review system is overturning a lot of umpires' calls and making umpires look in Major League Baseball look really, really silly, and umpires aren't happy with the system that Major League Baseball's brought in. Do you think the National League have the three teams promoted to League Two, because you'll see potentially might not be promoted by them? There's growing calls for 3 up, 3 down from League Two with the relegation, and National League with promotion. Like I say, there are some really good, decent-sized clubs in the National League, and there's some good quality down there. And most of the National League clubs are fully professional anyway. There's growing calls to expand the promotion relegation from League Two and the National League. I mean, we're seeing expanded playoffs, for example. I think, is it next season from the Championship where they expand it from 6? Is it 6? Is it 3rd to 8th? They're going to expand it to 6 teams, I think, for the playoffs from the Championship. It basically means more money for TV revenue and clubs. Well, I think, I mean, that's going to go down to the wire, isn't it? And I think that's going to continue. Those calls to change the promotion relegation system from the Football League and the National League, I think those calls are growing. They've been there for a couple of seasons now, because no one team is running away with it. It's going right down to the end of the season. And look, I think English football, or football in the UK, should I say, we have some of the strongest depth and I'm including Scotland and Wales and even Northern Ireland to a certain extent in this. And I would also include the Republic of Ireland because they brought in a new third tier into their professional and semi-professional club system. The British Isles have some of the deepest depth. And when I say deepest depth, I mean we're talking the strongest developmental pyramid in regards to local clubs, not just in Europe, but in the world. Where there's organised leagues, where there is a pyramid structure where you can start at the bottom and work your way into the Football League. In theory, in practice, that would take, at least 20 years, 25 years if you were to do it properly, because you wouldn't get promoted every single season. That's ridiculous. But the club depth, the talent depth, the player development is there. The problem we have is the further up the pyramid you get, the more overseas players that are ultimately in the club system, and it's the same across Europe. It is the same. Germany and Italy have quite deep pyramids as well in regards to playing pyramids, from regional leagues into the more formal national league structures. And the higher up the league system you get, the more overseas players you have, and the wealth disparity between clubs. The lesser clubs have less resources. Some of the bigger clubs, can dominate a league system. And also there is that potential, like Dartford, to tumble down the divisions. We've seen it with some big clubs that are ex-Premier League and ex-Division 1 clubs of old, currently languishing in League 1 and League 2 and the non-league, who have struggled in more recent times because of fluctuating fortunes. So there is that, the promotion relegation system, big clubs can end up in lower leagues. Leeds were the prime example that many will use in the more modern times, but Bradford City is another one. They were an ex-Premier League club, of course. And they end up further down the pyramid than, their fans, I think, would be used to. And then there's other clubs that come up from the lower divisions, like a Wigan. There you go. Wigan's a good one, who end up in the Premier League, win some silverware, and then end up tumbling again back down the divisions because certain teams can overextend themselves. That's the joy and the frustration, I think, of the pyramid system. And I think one of the bigger problems we have right now is how fans truly feel about how things are going. If you were to survey fans up and down the country, in the home nations, I think they would give a very interesting feedback on the state of the game. The wealth disparity, how the TV money is distributed. There seems to be a favouritism for certain clubs when it comes to punishment over others. I think poor governance, I think, would come up. Lack of transparency in finances and ownership would be an issue. I think that would definitely end up as a discussion point, and rightfully so. I would guess there's a lot of frustration with how the game is governed and how teams are owned and run. I think that's definitely a fair assessment of where things are at in that regard. Like the quality of play that we see, I think, as I say, I do think so that there is, but then good ownership comes along, and we have these feel good stories about clubs, going up the divisions and building something and developing players and having success. And I will use Wrexham as an example. I think they've had a great run of things in recent times. They're finding it harder in the Championship than they did in the lower divisions. They've realised that, hey, there's a bit more to this than just spending money. You've also got to develop players within your system, and develop local talent as well, to sustain the growth. Walton and Hersham, oh well, that's down the road from me, who are famously. Okay, I have no idea what your question is a bit confusing here. They were in the 10th level, and now they're on the verge of ending up in the National League system in the 6th tier. Yeah, well, obviously it's not. You've got to have a fair bit of funds to invest and to go on this journey of working your. The feel good stories are becoming less and less. Oh, some students, 7, 19-year-old students. Oh my god. Well, hopefully it's a sustainable pathway that they're on in regards to the development and the growth and the progression of the club. And maybe one day Walton and Hersham make the Football League, and that would be very interesting if they do make the Football League, because that would be a feel-good story. It's like Solihull Moors or something. Have I been off? No, I worked Good Friday. I had an early start with the day job, and I'm working tomorrow. But I will be having most of next week off. I'm off. I've booked 4 days off work next week, so I'm going to have a 6-day weekend next week. And I kind of need it. Need a bit of a recharge. Need a bit of a break. There's a lot of changes happening with work. I've got to go into work next week for a work meeting, but I'm on technical holiday, so it's an unpaid thing, which is a bit annoying. Would have liked to have got some money out of the company, but there you go. It's windy outside where I am. I went down the shops just to get some soft drinks and a few other bits and pieces, and you get some. So I had to go local shops, and there's a bit of a breeze. It's pleasant. It's not cold, but when the wind picks up, it's a bit breezy. But obviously, I'm in the southeast. But as I say, the north and northwest, and Scotland and Ireland and stuff. That's different. A friend of mine is going up to Scotland next week to visit family, and she's going. It's snowing in Scotland, so the divide between like North England upwards and Ireland and Northern Ireland, as I said, as I said in regards to my video on the channel about Easter, Happy Easter video, even Iceland and Norway have got some strong winds and wintry conditions, which can happen at any time, really, when you're at altitude and when you're at that longitude and latitude. But we have had some cold spells in April before. It's just a bit breezy out. It's been a little bit below average temperatures until recently. We are expected the weather to warm up, although I am going to double check the weather outlook for the week, because I'm off next week. I'm not at work, apart from tomorrow morning. I'm going in for we get overtime on bank holidays, so it's just a bit of pocket money, really. It's going to be quite warm next week, actually. It's going to peak at around 23, 24 degrees on Wednesday. So my week off is actually looking nice for once. Every time I book some time off work, it's generally really crap weather, but the weather's looking nice for next week. Although, let's have a look. It's going to be a bit chilly overnight. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little bit of a frost overnight, but it's looking pleasant for tomorrow. Tuesday's looking nice. Wednesday's looking really nice. Then it gets cold again towards the end of the week, and there's a chance of bit of rain. Although there's a few little showers that are floating around today. It's not looking too bad. But as I say, the weather further north is not looking too good. But yeah, the weather further north, I mean, this was warned about. People were laughing about it and joking about it, but actually, if you're out there, it's not particularly pleasant. As I say, the weather's quite nice. There's just a bit of a breeze. There's some windy. We're expecting some windy spells and maybe the odd little bit of rain, but next week the weather's looking actually rather nice. So for once, I booked some time off work and the weather's decent. So that's normally when I have time off work, the weather is generally pretty crap, but it's looking quite nice for next week, which is good. Fenerbahce Besiktas. Yeah, you couldn't get more tasty than that. If it was Galatasaray Fenerbahce, I think that would be a bit more of a security concern. But Turkish league's the Turkish league, isn't it? There's always some tasty stuff going on in the Turkish league. And of course, Turkey have qualified for the World Cup, and we will see how they do, if they can have a similar run to 2002. I think this World Cup is more open than people realise. I think this World Cup, on a playing standpoint, we're not going to talk about a fan standpoint because I've talked that to death, that it's quite an open tournament. Well, Wales missed an opportunity. Well, Craig Bellamy obviously didn't start the qualifying campaign as coach. I think Craig Bellamy's done a very good job with the resources he has available, the playing resources and the actual resources that the Welsh FA or the FA of Wales, as we say, have available to him. In regards to funding and facilities, I think he's done a pretty decent job up to this point with his limited coaching experience. He's done some youth coaching. He's never actually really been the main guy. He's had limited spells. He's still quite early in his coaching career. He's mellowed a lot as he's got older, I will say. He has mellowed as a coach, but I think he's done okay. But I think they had their own little golden generation of players a little bit. I think they are missing the Aaron Ramseys, the Gareth Bales, for example. It's local. It's like a derby match, isn't it? Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England. They're kind of the bragging rights you want to get against your near neighbours. I think he was frustrated that they failed to get through to the final playoff phase. And it was, as you can see, that frustration that they failed to qualify. I think that bubbled up a little bit. I think the Welsh FA keep him on, and well, they're co-hosting, aren't they, Euro 2028? So I can see them keeping him on for another 2-year cycle, develop some of the young players, bring some more of the young players through, and go from there. Thoughts on Italy missing 3 straight World Cups? Well, Italy have decided to refuse to qualify for 3 tournaments in a row with fascist dictatorships. The irony of that. Just making a joke there. It is worrying that they have failed to qualify, yet they qualify for the Euros. Partly because it's easier to qualify for the Euros, but yeah, they're not. It's sort of similar to the disappointment we've had with England for a long time, with in the 90s and the 2000s. But there was a period in the 70s where England were in a similar situation where they weren't particularly good, didn't qualify for 74 or 78, so we failed to qualify for 2 consecutive World Cups. And England, so I think they should have kept Gattuso on. His record wasn't that bad as coach with the win percentage. Didn't lose many games. I think Baggio went to the Italian FA after the first World Cup miss and was like, yeah, we need reform of the system. We need to look at youth development. How many overseas players are in academies? How many overseas players are at clubs? And the Italian FA went, thank you for your recommendations. Here's your money for your work. And they didn't enact a lot of them. So it's the men in blazers. It's the same with the FA here. It's the same with the FA here. For many, many years, the number of, at the top level in the top 2 leagues, the percentage of players who were eligible to play for England dropped to a historical low of 39%, I believe, one match day weekend. It really dropped. And the quality that we saw on the field wasn't great. And in regards to the national side not doing well at tournaments, and something had to change. And, England missing 74 World Cup, 78 World Cup, 2008 Euros, for example, there was a growing sense of frustration. And then suddenly we start seeing under Stuart Pearce and then latterly A.D. Boothroyd and then latterly Gareth Southgate in regards to the under-21s, these young players doing really well at their age grade tournaments. And there were growing calls for clubs to play more English players and restrict the amount of overseas players you could have in the squad. Now, part of the problem is we've got rid of reserve squads. It's as a response to the financial crisis. And so many clubs just sign mercenary foreign players and coaches. I think it's kicking off between Dynamo Dresden and Hertha Berlin, but nothing surprises me with the Bundesliga. But no, Italy failing to make 3 consecutive football World Cups is worrying. But then you look at their other sports like cricket and baseball and rugby union, where they've done really well in the last couple of years and have really massively improved. There's something to that. Their most popular sport they're struggling in, but other team sports they're doing really well in lately, and that is going to inspire young kids to go, well, this team's doing well, this team's not. I'd rather play this sport. And you've got to understand there's a competition with all the national team sports and the structures to get players, and success helps with that. Is it worse without Italy? Well, you want the best players and the best teams there. And are there any really top Italian players right now that you would go, I want that player in my team? I want that Italian coach coaching my team. That's the question in regards to club football. And you could argue the Italian clubs, much like the English clubs, are overly reliant on overseas players to fill their squads. I think the quality of football is a lot less now than what it was 20 years ago. I think we can all agree on that. I'm old enough to remember, the 90s. And there was talk in the 90s that goals per game average at international level had actually dropped to a historical low in 92, 94. And then Euro 96 comes along and we had some really exciting matches at Euro 96 and then World Cup 98, and the rest is history. But there was a point in the early to mid 90s where if you look at the goals per game average, it was really dropping off. And there was low scoring games at international level, and people were concerned about, okay, what's going to happen here? We're at this transitional period with satellite TV and what we now would call the modern era, with the Premier League, Champions League kind of era, and we're at this crossroads. And I think, mistakes were made. I think mistakes were made. Again, I remember bits of USA 94. Again, we were both very young kids at the time. I remember bits of Euro 92, but I'm that old. I'm 37 this year, so I can say that. I could say that I was born in the 80s and I remember little bits. Euro 92, 1992, for me, was basically my formative, I'm going to say this, my formative kind of early understanding what was going on. And but I remember World Cup 94, it was hosted in the US, and I was allowed to stay up late and watch games. In fact, I watched the majority of games. And at that age, I was, not sports mad, but I was football mad. I was sports mad. And the rest is ultimately history. I think Euro 96 really did hook me on football. But as I've got older, I've enjoyed it less. Like, I'm really not enjoying the last 5-6 seasons. I would say, so even before the COVID pandemic, I was enjoying football significantly less than, as I say, 20-25 years ago when I was a kid. Really not enjoying it. I would say the World Cup in 2018, I would say was a good tournament. Same in 2014. And I'll say since then, I've really, just the drop off of enjoyment is there. well, you're a kid and you want your country to do well. I think the Czech kids our age, people from Czech, the Czech Republic who are in their mid to late 30s would feel the same as we did when Germany won the final. Um, you know, who did the Czechs play in the semi? I've got to remember who they played in the semi-final now. I've drawn a blank there. I've actually drawn a blank about who they played in the semi-final. No one remembers who the Czechs played in the semi-final, but everyone remembers the England-Germany semi-final, which was one of the most watched sporting events of all time in 1990s. That semi-final, one of the most watched events on British television history, was the Euro '96 semi-final between England and Germany. I forget who the Czechs actually played in the semi-final now. I watched the game. That's going to really annoy me. But I looking back on it, yeah, I've got fond memories, very fond memories. Same with France '98, very fond memories. When I was a kid, I felt disappointing got knocked out. Is that strange being from Wales? That's because Wales weren't qualified, and most Welsh kids who liked football, who were not from the south of Wales, would generally support Liverpool, Everton, ironically Shrewsbury, Chester, Tranmere. They would gravitate to the local English clubs just across the border, and resonate with the players because because I don't know, it's a weird one. But yeah, I think also Scotland was starting to struggle for tournaments after World Cup '98. They didn't qualify till Euro 2020 for another major tournament. It's taken them this long to qualify for another World Cup. So, and they're drawn in the same group as Brazil, like '98, and Morocco, which is just, hello, welcome back. It's just flashbacks. So the decline of like Scotland, for example, over the last 25 years, and the struggles at Scotland, for example. But in the 70s, a lot of English people said, let's get behind the Scottish team when they were qualifying for tournaments when England was struggling. And so it's a weird one. But I don't know how you can really go about it, really, but because Wales were genuinely that bad in the 90s. They were shocking. And England and Scotland were far superior than Wales, although England did miss in the World Cup in '94. Wales were that bad. Looking back, England dominated the home nations championship. Scotland won many also. Wales and Northern Ireland were bad. Yes. Yes. Although Northern Ireland, ironically, have qualified for more tournaments than Wales, and I find that weird. I really do. But there we go. But no, Scotland in recent decades, it's only been under Steve Clarke that Scotland have become competitive at tournaments again and actually qualifying for tournaments again. But it's just cyclical as well. Very cyclical. Like Ian Rush, for example, one of the greatest Welsh players, never played at a World Cup, but there we go. Wales had some great players. I'd argue they should have qualified for a few more near-miss. Yeah, look, again, it's very interesting. The decline in Welsh Rugby Union has seen a rise in Welsh football, which is very, very interesting. Or just the decline in rugby in general in Wales, because their rugby league has gone down the toilet as well, is seeing a rise in quality in their football. That's very interesting. That's an interesting subplot that I think a lot of people just don't realise is the two rugby codes are struggling in Wales at the moment. The football team at a national level, an international level, doing better. There's a correlation there, I think. Yeah, look, I think the fact that more Welsh players are playing in the Championship and in the Premier League as well, Welsh eligible players, I think has a big part to do with it. The rise of Wrexham, I think, has definitely boosted the sport as well. And more kids now want to play football instead of rugby or even cricket for Glamorgan, for example. So I think the Wrexham impact is there. I think the decline of both codes of rugby and the struggles kids now see more opportunity with football clubs and playing and inspiring to be your next Aaron Ramseys and Gareth Bales and Joe Allens and such. And there's some young players they can resonate with who are playing at decent club level. Having 3 Welsh clubs in the Championship will help. Yeah, I mean, imagine if all 3 Welsh Championship clubs were to make the Premier League. I think that would definitely boost. Well, having 4 Welsh clubs in the Football League at this point, I think, is a good sign. For many years, it was just Cardiff and Swansea, and now you've got Newport, although Newport are having their struggles, but you've got Wrexham doing well. And so that generally, does assist things when you're playing at a higher level and a more competitive level, and you're getting more national TV exposure. You're getting that international exposure as well. And, you've got Welsh players playing at some pretty decent clubs. So winning trophies, competing, it does help. So, yes, that does have a positive impact. But I also think I'm going to call it the Gareth Bale impact. Now, whether we can debate the pros and cons of Gareth Bale's career and whether he fully achieved what he could have achieved, I will say this. You can definitely see an impact by a certain superstar player and some other pretty good players around him having success, winning trophies, playing at the top level, and then going on to play at international tournaments. And as I say, Wales have started to be in the conversation about qualification for Euros and World Cups, and actually appearing at tournaments. Like, they broke their World Cup curse by appearing at a World Cup for the first time, I think, since, was it 58 or 62 or something? And so that then changes the narrative. When you're seen as the true underdog all the time, to finally make it with the big boys, that changes that narrative. I would say Ian Rush is one of the best ever to play for Wales. And I've met Ian Rush, so I'm going to say that he was a brilliant player. I would say Aaron Ramsey and Joe Allen go under more. Aaron Ramsey's pretty good. I think Joe Allen went very understated. Neville Southall in goal. There's been a lot of great players for Wales at various points. Who've also had great club careers and had great success. I think now, Sparky. I think definitely Sparky gets criminally underrated as a midfielder. And he was a very versatile player as well. Very fiery character. Yes, he had a streak in him of he was a combative player. I think Gary Speed is definitely underrated for what he did on the field. Definitely criminally underrated. Criminally. I don't think he gets the plaudits he deserves for his ability on the field. In part because the clubs he played for didn't quite achieve what like your Mark Hughes did at club level, or Ian Rush or Gareth Bale or whatever. There were other players who achieved more at club level in regards to being part of teams that won trophies. Gary Speed was, I think, a better player than Gareth Bale. Just white drop. I mean, he played for Newcastle when they were actually in Leeds, and they were top clubs. At the time, you could argue Newcastle could be underachieving now. So when he was playing at Leeds and when he subsequently played for Newcastle, they were top clubs at the time. But didn't have the same level of silverware that Ian Rush had or Gareth Bale had at end of career. Like Craig Bellamy was a pretty decent player and is now the national coach. And I think Neville Southall, I think, is a criminally underrated goalkeeper. He's one of the greatest goalkeepers ever to grace a football field. But because he was Welsh, at an international level, that's where I think he gets forgotten, is because your other goalkeepers like your David Seamans or your Gordon Banks, your Peter Shiltons, and then you've got other international goalkeepers for other countries are more recognisable because they played at World Cups and Euros, whereas Neville Southall never played at an international tournament. And that's where he gets forgotten. Neville Southall is a very interesting character as well. He's a very interesting social campaigner, admittedly for the adult industries, the sex workers and all that, but and other social causes. Neville Southall is is a very complex and interesting character, and definitely worth a look at. Everton fans love him, but Neville Southall is a very, very, very interesting goalkeeper and a very interesting person, and is definitely worth looking at just as a person profile. He does a lot of advocacy for vulnerable people, a lot of advocacy for anti-human trafficking and sex workers. There's a lot of things he's very passionate advocate for. Whether you agree with his advocacy or not, he's a very, very Mickey Thomas god. Didn't he play? Wasn't he the guy who played for Wrexham? And when he scored that goal against Arsenal, and was it the 1992 FA Cup? I remember. But no, North Wales, yeah, is where a lot of the really great Welsh footballers have come from. South Wales is where the rugby players come from. So it's very interesting with athlete development. It's very interesting with the athlete development in that regard. There are certain parts like the Southwest Rugby Union, a lot of great rugby union players from like Devon, Cornwall, Dorset, Somerset come through rugby systems. The Midlands and Thames Valley. Thames Valley is obviously a lot of good rowers who've come through, gone to the Olympics are from the Thames Valley. Then you've got like the Northeast, a lot of really, really good football players from the Northeast, some really good cricketers from like Yorkshire and Lake. It's very interesting, the athlete development from different regions of the country. And then you go over to places like the US and Canada. It's again very interesting, about the sports that high-level athletes participate in. It's very interesting. Well, most of the early professional clubs were in the Midlands and the North. In regards to that foundation of the Football League, and then ultimately the rival Football Alliance, and the combination and the history of the game. There were clubs all over the country, but the early professional game where they're getting paid was in the Midlands and the North, same as rugby league. And then because you're getting that pay aspect, any talented players from the South would go, well, I can get paid up north. I'm a star player. I'll go up north. And then that's when the Southern clubs went, hang on, we're losing our players here. We need to join this Football League system. We need to get involved with what these other clubs from other areas in the country are doing. And that's why Arsenal were called the Bank of England club. They were very, very conscious of the fact that, especially in the southern half of England, players were being poached by clubs up north because of the professional aspect and playing in a more structured professional league. And so they decided to spend money. That's why they got Herbert Chapman from Huddersfield. Huddersfield were winning everything. And they went, we want that guy at our club. We're going to give him money. We're going to pay him. We're going to pay this guy a lot of money. And we're going to give him a budget to sign as many players as we can. And so they were called the Bank of England club because a lot of people at the time said, well, Arsenal buying the league. But they realised this team in Huddersfield and this guy in Huddersfield called Herbert Chapman and the team he was coaching, they had done something that no other club had done at that point, which was win 3 league titles in a row. They were like, we want to emulate that. He's our guy. He's doing something. He's revolutionised the game with his tactics, his stuff. Let's get him at Highbury. And that's where I think the dynamic shifts a little bit between the Midlands and the North, and then the whole of the country having a pretty, balanced player development and club development and a more competitive, structured league. And then you see the Southern League clubs and the Midland League clubs. A lot of Southern League clubs after World War One and before World War Two suddenly joined the Football League, and it completely changes the dynamic. And player development and recruitment and success. And then you see the clubs in London and around the home counties become more successful and winning trophies and competing. And as the decades go on, like your Oxford Uniteds, your Lutons, your Swindons, they suddenly start winning League Cups. And then they're starting playing in the top flight. And then you're starting to see like a little bit of a shift with success, more clubs in London having success. And then Portsmouth and Southampton, they have a bit of, especially Portsmouth, they were a very good club. That's on the south coast. So that suddenly the trophies are starting to get scattered around the country a little bit, and that bit of the M62 and the Midlands, which is rugby league country as well, ironically, the M62. Suddenly the talent gets dispersed, and you get Scottish talent. The first professional players are actually in Scotland. You get clubs going, we want that Scottish geezer, we want Jockey, we'll get him down. We'll have that Irish geezer from Dublin, we'll have him. And suddenly you start seeing playing squads with English, Irish, Welsh, Scottish players playing in Division 1. And then obviously we export the game to Europe, and the rest is history. And I love doing the club histories with the links with clubs and the links with how a lot of Italian clubs have got English origins. It's weird. And suddenly the rest is history. Welsh clubs had their own league from the start and didn't join the Football League. Do you think they'd have any fan base or purely based on being in England? Their best players would have still got poached because the lack of money. England and Scotland, the industrial areas of England and Scotland is where the money's at. So that's why the Glasgow and Edinburgh clubs tend to dominate in Scottish football, as in historically with the amount of trophies, although Aberdeen's an outlier with the oil industry. And the money would, the Welsh players would have gone to England or gone to Scotland to play the best, which is what happened anyway. The best Welsh players went across the River Severn or across the Dee and ended up playing in England. And I think some Welsh players did play in Scotland, but they migrated east and northwards. Even with Welsh clubs playing in the English league system, their best players ultimately went across the border and migrated. And it's the same with Scottish players migrating south when they realised a professional league was being set up in England. There were professional players in Scotland, and in part that's why the Football League and Football Alliance become a thing. They hopped south from Glasgow Central and Edinburgh Waverley on the train. They pop out in Manchester Piccadilly off the train, get signed by a club in the Football League, Bosch, or get signed by a club in the Football Alliance. Rest is history, and they're getting paid. The Welsh, it would have still happened that the best Welsh players the money would have been in England anyway, or Scotland, and they would have been pinched. What kind of attendance do you think they would have had if not in the Football League? Not great. Once the Football League had beaten the Football Alliance and absorbed those clubs and established itself as the top level of the sport south of the border, and once the Scottish League, those two leagues had established themselves, English Division 1, Scottish Division 1, once they were established and structured and had the money, because Scottish football had a lot of money before the First World War as well, and even before the Second World War, there was a fair bit of money in Scotland. When they were like spending money and paying players a really good wage, there would have been no traction. There isn't traction now. Look at the Welsh League now; it's crap. And this is back in the day of Telegraph and newspaper reports being printed the next day. The journalists at the game having to send a telegraph to their newspaper offices that could be the other end of the country, have to get their story published, small little column on the match report, maybe a few lines, 2-1 result to Swansea versus Newport. It'd be interesting to see if Rugby League had got started and established a few years earlier, then Rugby League would be the dominant sport in this country. I've argued that. You look at the establishment dates of football clubs, Rugby League, Rugby Union, cricket. Football League gets established off, the combination completely falls apart. Football League gets established, 12-member clubs go, we're going to actually organise this properly. The Football Alliance go, well, their rules are stupid, allowing only one club per town to be professional. We're going to have our own professional league and do it because the combination was a complete fuck up. And they decided, well, we're going to have a rival league. We're going to compete for players. We've got some wealthy backers. Our clubs are being excluded from this exclusive club. It becomes a battle. The Football League is better structured, better financed. They win. Football Alliance clubs start struggling financially, withdrawing from the league, going, we can't afford this. Too many of our fans are going to Football League games rather than Football Alliance games because they had that extra year, remember, of establishment and success. And the Football Alliance gets absorbed by the Football League. And then while that's going on, there's divisions between in rugby, as it was then known, the Rugby Football Union, because Rugby League wasn't a thing. It became the Northern Rugby Football Union in 1895. It took the name Rugby League, I think, later. I can't remember exactly when it was. It was within a few years they decided to call it Rugby Football League to distinguish itself from Rugby Union. And there's rumblings there because they're watching this and they're losing talented players to football. Ironically, rugby was losing because of the rules that Twickenham and the RFU had in place. Those clubs where they're talented athletes, and these were athletes, they sometimes were sharing facilities with football clubs. And their best players were being poached by the local football club because the local football club said, we'll compensate you for playing for us and give you a contract saying, here you go, we'll pay you to play. And they were like, well, we're barred from receiving payment to play for our, let's say, Bradford or Huddersfield or Wigan. And they were like, yeah, okay, we'll play with you. And so that is part of the reason why the Rugby League clubs split away in 1895 from the Rugby Union, set up Challenge Cup, which is the 1895 Cup they also play for in the Challenge Cup, and why the Northern Union becomes a thing, ultimately becomes the RFL, and ultimately comes the Super League and Championship we see today. So you could argue without the EFL, you don't get Rugby League. You don't get that split in rugby. You could argue without the Football League winning and being the first established professional league, you don't get other professional leagues starting up at a time when, professionalism in sport is in its infancy. You could argue that. That's a fair argument to have economically. They were the first organised professional sport of a team nature. You could argue cricket a little bit, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of football clubs exist, is cricket clubs were like, we need to keep our players fit in the winter. Let's give them something to do. And that's why they form various clubs, which is why Sheffield Wednesday exists, ironically. I believe I think is it either Notts County or Nottingham Forest, I think Sheffield. There's a few other, like Genoa in Italy, Genoa CFC, cricket and football club. So that's a very interesting origin story. We've done a video on that. And so cricket clubs were like, we need to keep our players fit. And they allowed their players, they saw football was less violent than rugby and therefore less likely to injure their players for the following cricket season. And so they came up with it. And so you could argue also partially cricket was sort of professional at this point. There's professional players who are paid to play cricket. And the rest is history. But you could argue if rugby league had decided to split away and go professional before football, or before the FA. If the FA don't allow professionalism, we don't get the Football League, Football Alliance, and what we have now. But at the same time, there were some smart brains who realised in rugby union, what was rugby, that we should pay our players. We can make some money here. You could argue if it weren't for football, rugby league might have been the professional sport first. And again, we could be having a completely different conversation now, where rugby league's the top sport and we're bashing the Aussies all the time. St Helens, are they the biggest rugby league sides? I would argue Wigan are probably more historically successful. You could argue Leeds, Bradford historically, although Bradford I think are a bit of a laughing stock now. The Challenge Cup final's been held at Odsal. Can't say that about St Helens. Although St Helens, Wakefield and Warrington are purely rugby league towns, whereas most other rugby league locations, you've got a pretty decent football club. And in some cases, in Leeds' case, for example, there's a pretty decent rugby union side as well when it comes to the top professional sports that are played in this country as team sports. But St Helens is a rugby league town. But I think Wigan Wigan definitely has that more success. Leeds is a bigger city, and you could argue Leeds a football city or rugby league city. Same with Bradford. That's a tough one. Warrington's definitely a rugby league town. Everyone in Warrington's a Wolves fan. Wakefield, everyone in Wakefield is a Trinity fan, Wildcats fan. Castleford's another one where everyone in classic gas. Hull's an interesting one. Hull as a city. You've got a football club and 2 rugby league clubs at professional level. That's an interesting one. And so, you've got that kind of conversation you can have. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't. St Helens the biggest rugby league side, but then you look at Australia, Brisbane Broncos, Parramatta Eels. In regards just to fan base, which would be bigger than St Helens. I think Parramatta have got the biggest fan base. A lot of rugby league fans in Brisbane don't like the Broncos, and that's what people don't realise is because the Broncos were the only NRL side in Brisbane for many, many years after they were brought into the competition in 1988. Yes, they had a lot of success, but there was a lot of rugby league fans who felt disenfranchised by the fact that there were other rugby league clubs in Brisbane. And also a lot of people have moved up from Sydney for work and were like, what's going on here? Who has the biggest fan base in rugby league in England? Ooh, that's an interesting one. When you've got a city the size of Leeds and a city the size of Bradford, they're by UK standards, excluding London, they're big urban areas, and they almost are one blob with a little bit called Dewsbury in the middle. They're reasonably big cities. Between Bradford and Leeds, there's I think in that metro area there's nearly 1 million people. So that's an interesting. Hull, you've got the 2 Hull sides. That's again another big city in UK standards of cities. That's an interesting one, really. But then you look at the one club towns like St Helens, Warrington, Wakefield, Castleford, where that's the main thing in town. I don't know because not every rugby league fan is a member of their club. So I'm a London Broncos fan. I don't have a season ticket. I don't have a membership. It would be the same whereby because of stadium capacity, not everyone is going to be able to. Obviously most fans are local to the club, but there's a lot of fans who aren't local to their clubs, as in living proximity. And so therefore attending games is an interesting one. If we're talking about average stadium attendance, as in percentage of stadium filled, that is a way to look at how popular certain clubs are in regards to their fan base, or in regards to having a fan base by percentage of stadium filled and percentage of available tickets sold. So interest in the club or growing interest in the club. That's an interesting one. York's case, you've got the football club as well, and they share the stadium. Wigan, they share the stadium with the football club. Huddersfield, they share the stadium with the football club, and the attendances at Huddersfield have been terrible in recent years. Any logic? Yeah, it depends what side of the city you're from. If you're from the west side of the city or the east side, the whole situation in rugby league is the same as the Bristol situation in football. There is a dividing line in the city, generally speaking. Whereas if you go to Nottingham in regards, Sheffield in regards to, or Liverpool in regards to their rivalries, where you've got a multi-club city in the same sport, it's a bit more blurred. But when it comes to Hull FC and Hull KR, there is a dividing line down the city. Bristol dividing line down the city. It's a bit more nuanced. I think that's a good word. It's definitely more obvious. Certain parts of the city are one and the other. In Hull, I think Hull FC have got more recent success. Although Hull KR have been successful in the last couple of years, Hull FC I think have got more historical success. I think that's how you look at it. I think but it's pretty even. I'm going to have to look. I think KR have had the longer trophy drought. I think is the best way to look at it. I think when it comes to who is the more successful, I think recent successes with KR, historical successes with FC. I'm not a massive expert on the two whole clubs. I'm going to be honest. Just going to put that out there. I'm not a massive expert on the history of both clubs, so I'm not. But I do find it interesting that Hull, as a city, has two top level professional clubs. Why that is, I couldn't tell you. Whereas Leeds just has the Rhinos, Bradford has the Bulls. Why, for this example, Hull at this stage of things? What in rugby league? No. I think there are. I think at the top level, yes, but at the lower levels, I wouldn't. I mean, you look at association football. There's multiple clubs and cities, for example. Sometimes they merge together, like in Newcastle United's case. You've got Newcastle East End and Newcastle West End. The irony of that merging together to form Newcastle United. Again, check out my history video on Newcastle United, which is now dated because they won the League Cup since I done that video. But we'll move on from the football club history videos. They're kind of fun. In rugby league in the UK, yes, but then you look at obviously with what's Sydney and Melbourne in Australia with the Aussie rules and rugby league, it's different. At the moment, they have a grading system at the moment, so it's a bit not true promotion relegation. I think where we're at with the sport in this country at the moment and the potential NRL involvement, IMG involvement with the grading. I've been highly critical of the state of rugby league in this country for some time. Highly critical. So technically yes, technically no. It's a complex with the IMG grading and with the potential further restructuring of the game. I think it's sort of in the air at the moment. It's hard to. Yes and no is the answer to that. Yes, technically there is, and yes, no, technically there isn't. Yes, we have Toulouse and Catalan at the moment, and whether Lee Leopards would be in relegation zone if it wasn't for IMG. Technically, you could argue that. You could also argue because they've won the Challenge Cup in recent years, that boosts their score because it's the last 3 years they look at. But the amount of spending and losses they make, I preferred it when they were Leeds Centurions. I understand why there's a rebrand, but to completely change the name and the nickname and the kits are awful. Derek Beaumont, I mean, God, he's sometimes you get these madcap characters, and at some point it's going to go horribly wrong in regards to Lee Leopards. I can see Lee ending up in problems down the track financially. Lee as a town is quite small, and I can see that ultimately not being sustainable in the long run. But it's just how the sport's developed, and with where we're at with the TV deal and attendances. When we look at Challenge Cup final, for example, there's a lot of empty seats. They're not selling out Wembley anymore, so that tells you all you need to know. And fans just don't have the disposable income they did 20 years ago when what was the new Wembley first reopened. So I think there is that. I do have concerns about several clubs in the Super League and Championship being financially viable, and we keep seeing financial struggles with clubs where they're on their knees. So I don't know how much longer it can be sustained at the level we're at. But we'll see what happens. But I'm not a fan on the IMG grading, but this is what the RFL wanted at the time. there's been criticisms of the system they've employed and the formula they employ. How Bradford got in with Odsal, I don't know. And then their chairman becomes the chairman of the RFL. That's just, well, yeah, we can see there's a bit of nepotism there and a bit of old boys looking after the old boys club, which is, I think, killing the sport. But so the governance of the game is crap. Do the French clubs add value? There's some good French players. I think the history of rugby league in France, I touched on it. There's a lot of politics there. There's a lot of distrust there. If you go to Southwest France, they love the sport. I think they add a little bit, but I think the way their introduction into the English system has been implemented, we tried it with PSG, and yes, PSG had a rugby league club in 30 years ago. That was badly mishandled. And so you wait until the mid 2000s, and Catalan is you merge a couple of clubs in Perpignan together, and that region of southwest France, to get Catalan Dragons. Now, Toulouse are what I would call a French foundation club. So let's just make that clear. I think they add something, but I think we need a strong domestic French system that is supported rather than bringing the French. Or if we are going to have the French clubs, the top French clubs involved with English Super League and the English Championship, we need to have a strong developmental league in France where local talent is developed and brought through the ranks, and then Toulouse and Catalan can go, right, here's our catchment area, here's your catchment area, very similar to how they do it in the NRL. And we can develop our chosen talented players, and we can pick players from the youth teams and bring. I think that would work as a good system. And look, London's got an amateur rugby league structure. I think there's 8 clubs in the London league system. That's what you need to do in each club's catchment area. Go, right, here's your amateur clubs. If they're going to share one facility and you play all your games over a weekend at that facility, fine. That's where you develop your youth players and select players, very similar to what they do in Sydney and Brisbane and Northern Queensland and regional New South Wales and regional Queensland. I think that's how things need to be implemented. How many small rugby clubs of both coasts are still going is beyond me. Yeah, I agree with that. Is France rugby league scene based down south? France's rugby is south, although you will go even in other parts of rural France, there are more rugby clubs than football clubs. The irony of that, even though they've been more successful at football at the World Cups and Euros and tournaments, you go to anywhere in rural France, predominantly the south and southwest, but anywhere in rural France, even central France, northern France, every village has a local rugby club. They're better down south, but most villages, will have a rugby union club. A fair proportion have a rugby league club, except in the real big cities, and that's where it starts to become football dominated. But small towns, villages, rugby is more popular than football. So there's a reason why the French clubs are financially better off in rugby union and rugby league, ironically, at amateur and semi-pro level than football. France without African import football would be average, let's be real. They use the colonies. French colonialism paying off. The French are in denial about their colonial history. So they just went, you were born here, you're registered, you play for us now, we pay you. French sport is, and even their rugby is heavily influenced by the African colonies. You could argue that that's a very nuanced way of looking at it. It's a complicated way of looking at it, but a lot of French kids, I would say in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially the 70s and 80s, a lot of French kids wanted to be Platini. They wanted to be, Girez, Didier Cisse. They saw these players do very well at Euro '84, played well at the World Cups in the 80s, and they wanted to emulate that. So your Robert Pires, they get inspired to play the game because of Platini and Tigana and those great French players from Battiston, those great French players from the 70s and 80s. Problem is, there's no money in French football. The TV deal was crap. But yeah, the 70s, 80s, and early 90s inspired a lot of the French players. And then they get told, you're awarded the World Cup in 98. Let's see what you do. And a lot of the players were from minority backgrounds. And you could argue aren't truly French. And there was a lot of social division in France at the time. There still is. And the French government, initially when they were awarded the World Cup, I think, was it Mitterrand was still president? Or was it the first term of Jacques Chirac? I can't remember. I'm going to have to think about this. Was Mitterrand still president? I can't remember when they were actually officially awarded it. Because 98 they host it, and normally there's 5 or 6 years from awarding a tournament. I think Mitterrand was the socialist president, and Chirac was more of the Gaullist centre-right president. Who, when they do host it, he's the boss. But there was a lot of social unrest. There was a lot of protests, a lot of labour unrest, economic issues, poverty and crime in the poor urban areas. There was a lot going on in France. There always is. They're very good at rioting, striking, and political violence in France. Very good at it. Very, very good at it. It's almost like a pastime in France of we don't like the government. Anyway, Mitterrand is replaced by Chirac, and Chirac is the French president. And they made a big thing by having the World Cup in 98. And it was seen as a very unifying thing with the way they won, with the team that they had. They go on to win Euro 2000 with much the same team they had in 98. And Deschamps was the captain of both, who is now the national coach, obviously. And because there was a lot of players from minority backgrounds, North Africa, West Africa, Basque, German, so Alsace-Lorraine, so those border regions, because there were players of every background you can think of, from every region of France as well, that had a big impetus for a lot of the young kids from the African backgrounds to play. And it takes a generation, and then you get what we have now with the French setup. So, but a lot of the kids from the poor neighborhoods, the bagnole, as they're called in France, the ghetto, are from North African or West African descent. They don't see rugby as a pathway because that's seen as more rural, regional, not middle class, because it's still pretty working class in France compared to over here. But that's seen more as the provincial game, whereas football is seen more as the urban game. And most of the minority communities or the immigrant communities live in Marseille, Paris, Toulouse. Well, Toulouse has got a pretty strong, rugby union presence, but the big cities, Lille, and so those big urban areas with large immigrant populations like Nice, Marseille, Montpellier, Paris, Lyon, ironically, Bordeaux, ironically, even though they are also football cities, because they've got, and even Grenoble in the Alps is got a large immigrant population, it's bloody freezing in winter. Because of that, football is seen as more accessible for your Pogbas, for example, and Mbappe's. Whereas rugby union, even though there are players from these minority backgrounds, is seen as more a provincial game, and most of the smaller cities and smaller towns that are less urbanized, that are more provincial, have less immigrant populations. That's how it goes. It's just that it's not necessarily the case, because you've got some pretty good clubs in Paris and in some of the bigger urban areas in French rugby union and rugby league, but that's sort of how it's seen. France did win after failure. No, they were hosts in 98, so there's the difference. So they automatically qualify. Yeah, they didn't qualify in Italia 90 or USA 90, very much like England didn't qualify in 94, but England didn't qualify for 2 World Cups in the 70s. So you do get this period of cyclical nature. We've got to remember back in the 90s, it was easier to qualify. So this just shows you how bad French football had become in the 90s. They needed that World Cup. They were seen as a very average side going into the tournament because they had failed to qualify for the previous two tournaments. The French league system, the best players weren't playing in France necessarily. Although a lot of the players as part of that French team were playing in France. But in the years building up, there was this sort of, the national team isn't doing very well. You know, the best players have retired. The clubs aren't doing particularly well when it comes to European football. But we've got this opportunity to at least try and do better. And they go on and win it. They go on and win Euro 2000. They unearthed the generation of players by pure accident. They got confident, they got big contracts, they went to bigger clubs, they got this exposure, and the rest is history. Now, in 2002, that, you know, began a trend of previous winners losing the following tournament, which has carried on quite with worrying regularity, getting knocked out at the group stage. So this is why I think Argentina, can they repeat? Because since 2002, the winners of the previous tournament have failed to get out the group stage within, I think there's only 1 year the previous winners progressed from the group stage. I think. No, actually, no, I'm not sure there is actually. I think every World Cup, apart from Brazil in 2006 getting out the group stage after winning in 2002, every World Cup since 98, the winners of that World Cup, the following tournament, failed to get out the group stage, apart from Brazil in 2006. So it's going to be interesting to see if Argentina break that trend and do a Brazil in 2006 and get out the group stage following winning the tournament. And no team has defended the title since. Who are the last back-to-back champions of the World Cup? I'm going to have to have a little think here. I think the last back-to-back champions of the World Cup were Brazil in 58 and 62. And before that was Italy in 34 and 38. So it's very hard to win a second tournament 4 years later. Yeah, they did get 2022, but you can see the trend here. There's a long-term trend where since 98, only 2 holders have actually made it out the group stages. And no one has defended the title. It's an eye-opener if you compile the list of French players who could have played for Guadeloupe or Martinique. But then would they? Well, they were obviously, a lot of them were born in France or were technically born French citizens, so they had the right to be called up. This is the debate around, international eligibility rules. We keep having it in the post-colonial kind of era, and we've had this debate about international eligibility and who should be eligible to represent whom, and right of residency, and a whole host of things in that regard, in regards to, you've had residency, you can, like Diego Costa is the prime example of a player who played for Brazil because he's Brazilian, but then because he's lived in Spain for so long, he got residency and played more international games for Spain. But we can go back to Di Stefano, who played for Argentina, Spain, and I believe Italy. Yeah, but you could argue Morocco has done very well, but a lot of players who actually play for the Moroccan side were actually born in Morocco. So there is that. And Morocco is also a stable country in Africa compared to all their neighbours. It's possibly the only stable country in Africa that's qualified for the World Cup. Maybe South Africa, you could argue, but having a stable country with a stable economy tends to help encourage your citizens to stay and not seek employment overseas. Wales without English import is also alarming. It happens everywhere, more so in some nations than others. Well, Wales is an interesting one because there's no Welsh passport, same as Scotland. It's just where you're born. And again, the home nations, and again, eligibility, because Max and Tom Evans, who I went to school with, who played rugby union for Scotland, even though they were many years above me in school, but I did go to school with them briefly. Chris Evans, that ginger radio presenter, is their cousin, and they could have played for England. They could also have played for Wales as well. Or if your granny was from Llandudno, or Caerphilly, or Rhyl, just go on holiday to Rhyl. You qualify for Wales. If you can survive a weekend in Rhyl, you should automatically get Welsh qualified for Wales in any international sport, I think. I mean, if you can survive a weekend in Barry Island, I think you should automatically qualify for Welsh nationality, I think. But it's like, if anyone can survive an hour in Blackpool without getting approached by a crackhead, I think you should represent Lancashire in the County Cricket Championship. I think there you go. But jokes aside, like Shanklin, who played for Wales in rugby union, has a very English accent. Sam Warburton technically could have played for England as well. Just going to put it out there. I think Ryan Giggs could have played for England, and also was a rugby league player in his youth as well. I forget which system he was coming through in rugby league, but he could have played for England. It was quite. And I think Neville Southall could have played for England as well. But yeah, I can't remember who Ryan Giggs, because he took his. I can't remember if he took his father's name or his mother's name. He changed his surname, and so Alex Ferguson. They were scouting, and he was Ryan. I forget his birth name on his certificate, and he changed his surname. I can't remember if he took his father's name or his mother's name later on. And a few years before, he's playing rugby league and he's playing football, and he's been scouted by, take a look at this guy, and Wilson, that's it. And there's a schoolboy scouting, and Fergie sends some scouts down, and they're not interested in him. Gets a bit older. Ryan Joseph Giggs, as he becomes known, is scouted again and ends up as part of the class of '92. And the rest is history, so they say. But yeah, he was lost to rugby league and was won by football. Partly because of a name change, partly because family circumstance. Wales would be in the trenches with San Marino and Moldova if it wasn't for it. I don't think Moldova are that bad, but San Marino, God, they finally got a couple of international wins in the last year. At one point, I think they'd won more games in a row than they were on a better win streak than Manchester United when Ruben Amorim was in charge, and they made a big thing about that on social media. I will say this about San Marino. I will say this about some of the smaller clubs and smaller nations in international sport. The Iceland Cricket Association don't take themselves too seriously. Whoever is running some of these social media accounts for some of these smaller, lower level clubs and smaller sporting nations, like Iceland's Cricket Board, for example, or San Marino or whatever like that, they don't take themselves too seriously. And ironically, it makes you more interested to see how they progress and how they do, and how they develop, and if some good players come through a system and all that. It does make you chuckle. Wales like a quality centre forward, help even with English help. I wouldn't say that. I think the problem is the population size in Wales and the lack of a professional game. When I say that, yes, there's some professional clubs, but that can't make up the difference between grassroots clubs, player development, funding. That's from centralised funding, and a whole range of things. You need a grassroots base. Italy needs to start looking for Italian Americans and Italian Canadians if they want to qualify again. No. Because most Italian Americans and most Italian Canadians play baseball, and a fair few play ice hockey, and then you really are scraping the barrel then, because some of them can't even speak Italian. So we've got to remember. That's when please tell me you're joking. I think there is issues with, again, player pathways being blocked by clubs, because it's the club country debate that we have constantly in a lot of sports, as importing that foreign youth talent that's been scouted, getting them in, and it blocks the pathway of a young player being developed. Money issues, structural problems. Germany, after their defeat in Euro 2000, yes, they got to the World Cup final in 2002. They just got on a bit of a run, but they completely transformed their youth development policy and club transfer policies as well. Clubs even signed up to, they looked at themselves and went, "This is embarrassing. We need to change things." I don't know. I don't know. I think we'll see what happens if Italy, 4 years' time, when it comes to 2030, if Italy miss again. But look at Scotland. They went a generation with failing to qualify for tournaments. And some of the oldest football clubs in existence are Scottish. So Italy is going through a period of decline or struggle that other nations have gone through, where they haven't been as successful. Scotland historically, but for a variety of factors, economic and political and structural, we are in this position now. Have you seen the thing like, yeah, Baggio, yeah, that's a well-known thing. He was employed by the Italian FA to have a look at why things weren't, the future of Italian football and player development, and what recommendations he would have to improve the game and develop the game and ensure that Italy could continue to be competitive at tournaments. Yeah, that's the Italian version of the Epstein files. Well, yeah, he was employed by the Italian Federation to compile a report and go from club to club and talk to coaches and look at the lower levels of the game. And the Italian fan base and the Italian press are rightly pissed off. They're asking questions about the transparency of the process, why the recommendations weren't acted upon, why we are where we are, and rightly so. There is definitely frustration, and I will agree with that. Hang on, where are we? There is definitely a rightful frustration with the state of play. I like the way the Italian press are calling it the Baggio files. I love that. That's so tongue in cheek, because obviously, famously, Silvio Berlusconi said, "Look, my parties, everyone's of age and everyone goes home alive." Oh yeah, look, Italy still managed to win a Euros even in this so-called period of decline. And that's what, again, I find very interesting, is they've made a couple of Euros, actual finals. I think they made the final in, was it 2012? And then 10 years later in 2022, they go on and win. They found a way to work a way out to make 2 finals in a decade when apparently they're in decline, and win one of them. So that in itself is interesting. I know I shouldn't smoke, but sod it. I'm Maggie. And I've got the window open, so the smoke alarm won't go off. I think that there is a rightful questioning of the Italian Federation and the decisions they took. He's one of the greats of the modern era. I mean, Baggio was still playing when I was a kid, and a lot of Italian players now who've not long retired or at the end of their careers were inspired because of Baggio at Italia 90 and USA 94, and what he contributed to Italian football at club level, at international level. So, quite rightly, Absolutely, quite rightly. The Italian public, Italian sports fans, the Italian sports media, politicians, I think, yeah. That's very subjective, and you can't compare eras because the rules have changed, the quality of equipment's changed, the fitness levels, the diets. That people go, well, Pele is overinflated because of the amount of like testimonial games he played, but he played his entire professional career apart from a brief stint in the US and Brazil. And youngest player, I think, to win a World Cup, youngest player to score in a World Cup final. I wouldn't put Ronaldo and Messi on the same level as some of the players who went before. I think the quality we're seeing more athletes. Yes, the players are fitter. The equipment is better. The diets are better, but I think the flair's been taken out of the game significantly. Whereas Pele was still playing at a pretty competitive level in the Brazilian league, which was a cutthroat league. Let's not kid ourselves. When he was playing, Santos legend. So it's subjective. There is no right answer. There is no right answer. Definitely no right answer there. Because you could look at Sir Stanley Matthews. It's crazy though. Italy has a good rugby team, a good cricket team, world champions of volleyball, fourth place in baseball, and has an amount of tennis players. They've got some good golfers as well. Some great motorsport figures. Great alpine athletes. They've had a very successful Winter Olympics. And well, he's from the Tyrol. He's from the Tyrol, which is ethnically Italian, linguistically German, but we'll move on from that. Because that is very, again, nuanced. And if you know your Italian history, you'll know that Austria, or the Austrian Hungarian Empire and the Austrian Empire, used to control about half of Italy, was allied to or controlled by Austrian interests until the 1860s, 1870s. So that one is a little bit more nuanced. But he's from the Tyrol region, which is German linguistically, Italian ethnically. That's your answer to that one. I think the development of rugby, the growth of cricket, again, because they've got a large immigrant population now in Italy that they didn't have 20, 30 years ago. The interest in baseball, in part because of the World Baseball Classic. Now, yes, you've got second and third generation Italian immigrants in the US and Canada that have contributed to their success in baseball. But the general manager was Italian. So the coach was Italian. And there's a big US military presence in Italy anyway, where they would play baseball as a recreational sport and locals want to play. I would say rugby's grown massively. I would say ice hockey's quite very popular in the northern mountainous regions. And you've got a couple of Italian players in NHL systems. Motorsport has always been a thing in Italy. And motor engineering has been a thing. Automotive engineering is a thing. So motorsport's always going to be up there with Ferrari and Lancia and Ducati and Aprilia and these big known, Moto Guzzi historical brands in automotive industry and automotive history and motorsport history. So that's a complicated one. Oh, now we've got a geography question. I don't know with that one. I think the Gazzetta dello Sport, the pink paper, I think with Richardson, that English bloke who liked his coffee on a Saturday morning. I think it's still football still dominates the sporting headlines. However, rugby is starting to get more of a presence on the front pages of the Gazzetta dello Sport, and it has been for a good while now. I think at some point Italy hosts a Rugby World Cup. I think Italy, having qualified for the last couple of Rugby League World Cups as well, and having actual Italians who are born and bred in Italy who are not Australian first or second or third generation immigrants, has definitely changed things. I think when Italy beat England in the Six Nations, that definitely had an impact. There is an English version of the Gazzetta dello Sport where you can get it translated, and I think they do have I think they actually do print an English version you can buy, because there's a big English expat community in Italy, and there's a big Italian expat community here. But there's a big US military prison. I like my geography too. I was a very good geography student on political geography, national, like so countries around the world. I could name all the capitals of Europe at one point, and most of the capitals of the world at one point. Yeah, I think that is a problem. Oh God, imagine if Yugoslavia, Jesus, they would have an absolutely stacked football team, an absolutely stacked basketball team, and a very, very good Olympic program. Oh God, let's not talk about the Soviet Union, please. Well, my new neighbours, this is quite interesting. So if you followed like my channel for a while, you'll see that I sometimes do videos in my garden where I'm, doing the weather, or I'm looking at how my strawberries are growing and my mint's growing. I'm going to be planting some sunflowers. I think I might go down the local garden centre and buy some sunflower seeds. Poland eats the Czech Republic. Christ, Poland annexing Bohemia and Moravia. It's like, let's bring back the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Oh God, or the Kingdom, or the Grand Duchy of Poland. Oh God. Problem is, FIFA, like rugby, like shiny new stadiums. That they do. And again, the Kalmar Union. Oh, now we're getting into history as well. Let's have a history lesson. I think with what we're seeing with international sporting organisers is they do like shiny stadiums. They do like obviously commercial interests over sporting interests at times. I think we are lucky here in the UK that we've got a lot of up-to-date modern stadiums, which is why we're getting the home nations. I think Ireland are getting Euro 2028. I think in part because we have the facilities. It's why we bid for a few World Cups in a row where we've come up short. But I don't think the Bulgarians would like being part of the former Yugoslavia. I've got some Bulgarian mates that wouldn't go well. They don't like some of their Balkan neighbours do Bulgaria historically. There's history behind that, which why that wouldn't work. Have they blown the SPL? I don't think so. I think there's still games to be played. I would like to see Hearts win it, although I've got one of my good friends is a Hibs fan. So she doesn't want them to win it, ironically, although she wants a club not from Glasgow to win it. Looking at stadiums like the San Nicola, Jesus, that really needs an upgrade. That was primarily built in Bari for Italia 90. The San Siro was upgraded for Italia 90. And there's a reason why the San Siro has been demolished. It's reached a point where it is aging. And the San Nicola, when it was unveiled, was this magnificent Colosseum. It was based on the Colosseum. And it was a fantastic, shiny new thing in Italia 90. There's a lot of money spent on it. And ultimately, it's falling apart. The Stadio Olimpico, I think, is the best stadium in Italy at the moment. But a lot of stadiums in Italy are crumbling. And again, it's the investment. This is what's hurting Italian football, is they're not investing in the infrastructure, for one. They are, how do I put it? They are not investing in youth development too, and other team sports have had better growth. Kids are wanting to play these sports. Locals are wanting to set up amateur teams at grassroots level, and they've received funding from various governing bodies and grants to do so. So, and by I've got to clean my laptop stand. That's grim. My laptop has. Oh dear, I've got to clean my laptop stand. Oh my, that needs a clean. But this is part of the problem. The stadium infrastructure has been allowed to reach a point where it's not in a great state, and that's partly to do with public sector in Italy and how construction projects and infrastructure projects generally go over budget and take forever and don't get completed on time. It's a thing in Italy to go, oh, we're getting a shiny new infrastructure project. Let's try and make as much money out of said infrastructure project and drag it out and then get more funds from central government to do so. And then the infrastructure, the building companies sort of pocket some of the cash. There's a bit of public sector corruption going on there. When you get offered an infrastructure project in Italy, a lot of money ends up disappearing into someone else's bank account and gets laundered, which is a problem. There's all sorts of issues, not just in Italy. I mean, across Europe when it comes to infrastructure upgrades and overruns, and even Germany, the most efficient nation in Europe, is not immune from that. As we saw at Euro 2024, the trains didn't stop running on time, and I'm a bit of a train spotter, so I'm a bit sad like that. The ADHD comes out where I have an interest in transportation history. The German transport network is struggling at the moment, and that was a thing that was well noted at Euro 2024. Was the trains were struggling to turn up on time. Ironically, our trains are more reliable than the German trains now. There's a big sudden surge in Germany to upgrade the rail network in the western half of Germany, because when unification happened, and bearing in mind, I know a lot about German unification because I was living out there when the Cold War ended, and it's always interested me, of the country of my birth, the changes that's happened in Germany. My mum still has work contacts in Germany with her company, and she still has to deal with the German offices and stuff, even though she doesn't travel there anymore. And it was very noticeable, the changes that have happened socially and economically in Germany, with the East getting a lot of infrastructure projects to bring the eastern half of Germany, the former communist East Germany, up to speed with West Germany. And a lot of the infrastructure funding went to places in Dresden and Leipzig and Chemnitz, Potsdam, Magdeburg, in order to bring them up to the Western German standard of living and economic. And it's taken time. But when it came to the World Cup in 2006, I don't think any, apart from Berlin, most of the hosts, I think all the host cities were in the former West Germany. The original Wembley? Are we talking about the current Wembley Stadium we have, which was opened in 2007, or the old Wembley that was opened for the FA Cup final in 1923? Because the Wembley Stadium we currently call the new Wembley, which is now 19 years old. There was all sorts of overruns with that. It cost a fortune. It ballooned in cost. It was a government. It was a Tony Blair and Gordon Brown decision to fund. Now we're going to get into a political discussion. I try and keep politics off the channel, but this is where sports infrastructure spending and then the related transport infrastructure spending come into play here. Because we also saw overruns with the new White Hart Lane rebuild, or the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, as it's now known, when they decided to rotate the stadium 90 degrees. And instead of it being in the old alignment, they rotated it to the new alignment, and there were overruns there, and Spurs got stuck at Wembley for longer than anticipated for an extra season. I think the Emirates was completed on time, but the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where the White Hart Lane was aligned like that, they rotated it like that, and they had to compulsory land purchases. There was a couple of building owners who didn't want to sell, or they weren't happy with what they were being offered to sell, so that led to some cost overruns. With the Wembley Stadium, that did overrun. That became a bit of a political football, because when it did finally open in 2007, yes, it opened late, and that was quite famous that it opened late, which then raised concerns about the Olympics in 2012. And would the Olympics in 2012 be on time, on budget? And there were some budget overruns there. And because of the Wembley Stadium, I wouldn't call it a debacle, but they had to redesign some of the seating. It was meant to have a fully enclosed stadium roof that could be retractable like the Millennium Stadium, but that didn't happen in the end. They had to redesign the stadium roof. Some people questioned why it needed the Wembley Arch, and was that a necessary feature of the facility. They had to redesign Wembley Way. They had to upgrade Wembley train station, which was only built for the old stadium. And you look at the development around Wembley Stadium, when you look at the photos of Wembley in 1923 and the FA Cup final, I believe, who was playing? It was Bolton. The White Horse final was famous because that was the first Wembley final. It's all fields. It's all fields. Is it Hertfordshire or Buckinghamshire? It's all fields. And you look at photos of the old Wembley, aerial photos, and the development around, the buildings around, it's completely changed. There's a lot of high rises there now, tower blocks in the sense of offices, hotels, and apartment blocks that are new high rises that have sprung up around the stadium, like a new commercial entertainment district sort of around the Wembley Stadium. You can see it from the North Circular. You can see it from the train when you on the London Overground. It's the same with the Emirates in a sense. It's right by King's Cross, but London has too many big stadiums: Wembley, Emirates, New White Hart Lane, London, Twickenham. Do they really need that many? That's an interesting point. You've missed out quite a few stadiums, ironically, in London that can seat over 30,000 people. And do they need that many? Well, Twickenham is the home of rugby union. The Olympic Stadium, they needed to find a use post-Olympics, so that's why West Ham are the tenants, although Tottenham and Leyton Orient also were interested in using the facility. You look at the plans for Selhurst Park, you look at potential plans to upgrade other stadiums in London, because each football club has their own stadium, so other clubs have seen what Arsenal did and want to copy what Arsenal did. Chelsea had problems with Stamford Bridge being limited on the foot, who owns it. The Supporters Trust owns it, so that creates upgrade problems for Chelsea. Fulham have spent a lot of money over the last 2 decades in really upgrading Craven Cottage to what it is now. They spent many years playing at Loftus Road, where QPR Loftus Road is crumbling. Brentford have replaced Griffin Park with the new Brentford Community Stadium. Wimbledon have got the new Plough Lane, which the main stand is quite big, and there's room for upgrades at Plough Lane. Charlton, if they have the money, would love to upgrade the Valley. Millwall have got the new Den, which is not a modern stadium now. It's a new stadium from the old Den, but they've been there a while. Who else? There's lots of clubs. Barnet obviously have moved stadiums in recent years, and they've got their facility, which is tiny. Leyton Orient have upgraded their stadium to a more modern standard, although it's still small by London standards. There's quite a lot of stadiums in London. Now, when we talk about big stadiums, you've got to remember that a lot of the football clubs in and around London have fans outside of London. And in part, where I live, there's a lot of fans of all the clubs in London who live in the Thames Valley. It's the same in Essex, same in Kent, same in Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire. There's a lot of who were Londoners who've moved to the home counties. Now that's put pressure on communities where I live. There's a lot of overspill, and there's more people leaving London. A lot of people also leaving Birmingham and other cities in the West Midlands like Wolverhampton and Coventry, and moving out into basically Middle England. Basically, it's the same up north with like Manchester and Leeds and Sheffield and Liverpool. There's a lot of, they call it middle class flight, and so there's pressures put on local housing. So there is that. Yeah, Chelsea do have stadium issues. Talks of United Ireland. I mean, yeah, that's complex, and that's a discussion for the other channel. I don't think that's appropriate discussion to have here. It's not appropriate discussion to have here, and there is political and economic ramifications should that happen. But that is for me a discussion for the other channel, because that could have consequences. Not here in the rest of the UK, but consequences for the island of Ireland. And there are some groups who don't want that to happen, and there are some groups who do want that to happen, and there's some groups who say Northern Ireland should just be a separate independent state, and it's a lot more complicated than just a simple, lovely Emerald Isle. And that's very historical complications that go back 500 years, and it's very, very complicated. And that is a discussion for the other channel, I think. And Southern Ireland's got its own political problems and social problems that aren't being addressed by the Irish government. So that is a separate conversation for the history boffin, which I have been neglecting. I might do some content for the history boffin on the other channel. And I've got to dig out my history books. I've got a few books that I'm reading right now that look at a bit of Irish history, actually. So I'm going to have to dig into them. Yes, Chelsea do have a stadium issue down the track. There's not a lot of available land in Kensington and Chelsea. Fulham are down the road, and I don't think a ground share is appropriate. And Fulham are limited in what they can do to Craven Cottage. They've done a fair bit, but the capacity of Craven Cottage is less than the capacity of Stamford Bridge. So that would pose a complication. If they were to try and figure out a solution to the issues they have, that's more complicated than what Arsenal had to do with the Emirates and leaving Highbury and moving stadiums, and what Tottenham did with White Hart Lane. There's even more complications in that part of London with Chelsea, in part because of the property prices and what a compulsory purchase it would be a right complex issue. I should stop having a haircut until Blackburn win 5 in a row. Jesus Christ! Oh dear. Yeah. Let's not do that. Because I don't know. It's my club's a mess. We need new owners, and we need some stadium upgrades, and that's not going to happen with the current ownership, who are clueless. I'd rather not do that, because I would look like a Rastafarian with very long dreadlocks by the end, because I would ultimately look like a Yeti, and I would rather not do that. Fun that might be. That's a channel forfeit we don't want to have. Just no. Yes, let's move on from that. What we beat Cardiff. We actually won a game. Oh Christ! Are we going to stay in the Championship? There are some saying we could get relegated from the Championship. So I just want to check this now, because we've had just a disastrous season. I'm not even joking. It's not great. It really isn't. Oh God, what am I doing? Oh, I can't even spell. Would help if I could bloody spell. We got West Brom tomorrow at 3:00. And we got Stoke. Right, let's have a look. We beat Birmingham 1-0. We drew with Borough. We beat Millwall. Hang on a second. We're actually not doing. We lost against Oxford United, which was annoying. We drew with Portsmouth. Who have we got left? We've got West Brom tomorrow. Saturday, we've got Stoke. Friday, the 17th, we've got Coventry. Now, I work with a Coventry City fan. We're going to lose that game. We've got Sheffield United on the 22nd. And Southampton. We finished our season against Leicester. So, looking at that, it's basically prime Premier League matchups. Every single club we've got to play for the rest of the season. West Brom are struggling. Stoke aren't doing particularly well. Coventry, they're promoted. Let's not kid ourselves. Sheffield United, they've had a bit of a season. Southampton, doing okay. Leicester, got a problem. We need to win some games here. I think Southampton and Coventry will lose. I think the other games we have chances to win if we play at our best. I think we've got enough to stay up. I'm not saying we will stay up, but I think there's enough. We've got enough to avoid. We're 19th. We're not doing particularly well. How many points have we got? How many points have we got? How many points? Where's points? We have got the 2 point. I think we've got enough to stay up. I think we've got enough. I'm not saying we will, but I think we've got enough. We've just got to beat the teams around us. We're not safe yet. We're not safe, but we've got a bit of a buffer. We just got to get a couple of wins out of there. 2 points ahead of West Brom, 2 points behind Charlton. We're not getting promoted. We're struggling a little bit, but we'll see what happens. Wrexham are 6th. Bit surprised with that. Bit surprised with Wrexham being 6th. Not gonna lie. Southampton beat Arsenal in the FA Cup yesterday, 2-1. They're in a semi-final. Okay. We've had a shock there a little bit, but Arsenal are wobbling suddenly. Lose the League Cup final, lose an FA Cup quarter final. When there were favourites going into both, there's a bit of a wobble there. A bit of a wobble with Arsenal. Not that long ago, a couple of seasons ago, we were. I think Tony Mowbray was manager. We were about three seasons ago. I think 3-4 seasons. It's been since I've been living here. How many points? Arsenal. They were 1-0 down in that game as well. Arsenal are 9 points clear of Man City. Man City have a game in hand. Palace have a game in hand as well, somehow. That's interesting. Oh, God, it's tight down there. Leeds, Forest, Spurs, West Ham. That's 4 points covering 4 clubs there. That's really tight down the bottom, actually. And Wolves have won their 2 out of the last 3. That's quite tight down the bottom end of the table. That's quite interesting. That's really interesting, actually. I wouldn't say, Arsenal's still in Europe, so there's a chance they could win, a couple of trophies. They could end up with a league and Champions League double, which is hard to do. I think they've got enough to win the league, but can they pull off a Champions League, considering they've just started to have a little wobble. But although the United guy, they haven't won 5 in a row, have they? That's even though under Michael Carrick they have turned things around and their league form has improved. They're not winning any trophies this season, so that, by United standards, that was set under Sir Alex Ferguson. this is where United are at. Their glory days are behind them at this point. The Ferguson era was a highly successful era for the club. There's no doubt on that. Highly successful era. And since 2013, the success has started to dry up. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of reasons why Manchester United have been dysfunctional for a long time. And they were showing signs of dysfunction under Ferguson with the ownership. But as I say, they had a very successful period, and they're having a less successful time now. And you look at the history of the English game, and it's very cyclical, very cyclical. And so, yeah, a little bit, yeah. I think they got very used to constantly competing and constantly winning trophies. Now, yes, they've still won some silverware post Ferguson, but I do think they got same with Liverpool when they went through their barren spell. They still managed to win the odd trophy here or there, but they had that 70s and 80s was their period. But then they were being challenged in the 80s by Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest and Everton, and other clubs won an odd trophy like here or there as well. So they weren't totally winning everything, but they won the majority of silverware in that period. And then the 90s come around and they hit a roadblock, and the game changed, and Liverpool and Everton, for that matter, and Nottingham Forest suddenly found the success stopped, and they didn't adapt quick enough to the changing dynamic that the Premier League brought. Are you a big club if you go decades without a trophy? Tottenham think they are, but they've managed to win a European trophy. I think fan base goes a long way. Size of fan base, competing for silverware. I think that is a nuanced question because it depends on the sport you're talking about. But there are some very big, well-supported teams that are very historical that haven't won for a long time. I think Everton are starting to turn a corner, but it's been a long time since they've been relevant in regards to making finals. Since they won their last trophy, they've made one major final in like 3 decades. So they have the historical success, and they've got the money in the bank, so to speak. They cashed the checks. However, this is their longest period without success historically. Liverpool going trophyless this season and not competing as well, and their league position. This is their lowest league position since before Klopp took over. So Arne Slot is finding it a bit more difficult to challenge than Klopp did. Now, that is quite striking. Man City, I think this would be the longest Premier League drought they've had since Guardiola took over. And I think that tells you something with their, I wouldn't call it decline, but they've gone back a little bit. They've regressed a little bit. But they've had their period of being the dominant club. It's a nuanced question. It's a very nuanced question. I think Leverkusen could have been more dominant had they kept Xabi Alonso and his philosophy. And they had a little opening, and they if they'd beaten Atalanta, he might have stayed. So there's that debate. I think he regrets going to Real Madrid. I think Xabi Alonso will end up in the Premier League. The Bayern winning too often. Well, historically, before 1970, they weren't very successful. So, and even since 1970, they've had periods where they haven't won. Borussia Mönchengladbach were the German side of the 70s you wanted to play for, and they were the most successful side in the 1970s in German football. Borussia Dortmund have challenged them at times. Kaiserslautern, VfB Stuttgart, now Bayer Leverkusen have upset the apple cart. Eintracht Frankfurt. There have been other German, Hamburg, Werder Bremen. I could list off a whole host of German clubs who've had success, but not on the same sustained level. And you could argue that has harmed Germany on the international stage over the last decade or so. They have struggled at major tournaments since 2014. It's very noticeable. And that is noted. I think in Germany, I think they need to have a hard conversation about the competitiveness of the Bundesliga. Now, the Bundesliga too and is very competitive. The rest of the Bundesliga clubs beat each other, and it's quite competitive. And then you've got Bayern with that consistency. Yeah, there is something like that, but Dortmund have won other trophies as well. Other German clubs have had success. I think that is important to note. That's another reason why I started doing the Football Club History series, was looking at how successful other German clubs have been and trying to debunk the myth that it's the Bayern Liga. And there is some truth that they are the most successful German club, and a lot of that success has come in what we would call the modern era, and that is totally fine point. They're not the most historical. I don't think they've got the biggest fan base in Germany, which is the same in France, with PSG has not got the biggest fan base. Now, when it comes to English football, that's quite nuanced, because you've got the overseas fans and the growth of the overseas TV market. Dortmund, I think Hamburg, Dortmund, they've got very sizable. Stuttgart, that's a one-team town. Really well, Rot-Weiss. There's other clubs in Stuttgart, but they're the big club in Stuttgart. You've got 1860 Munich in Munich, and they've got a very fervent and fanatical fan base. Small club, yes. You've got two top clubs in Berlin. Dresden's a one club city. Leipzig, well, RB Leipzig, you can debate the pros and cons of that. Hamburg's a split city with St. Pauli and SV. There's some big clubs in Germany when it comes to fan base size domestically. Schalke, yep, Gelsenkirchen. They should not be where they are. One of my old teachers was a Schalke fan, and his family, originally German origin, were from Gelsenkirchen. He obviously very English, but we're talking grandparents were from Gelsenkirchen. So I think Dortmund is an interest. Stuttgart, Augsburg. There's some big clubs fan base wise in Germany. I think every club in Germany's got a big fan base. It doesn't even matter what level you're playing at. I mean, if Dynamo Dresden can sell out, look, Portugal, Boavista. I mean, that's just shambolic, really, isn't it? But that's the modern state of play. Football has sold its soul, and there are damaging consequences. And the problem is the authorities, to see cash coming in, and the overseas, the media rights and all that, and the sponsorship agreements, the transfer fees, the merchandise sales, and they don't pay attention to what's really going on. And there is a lot of financial impropriety. There's a lack of transparency. And at times were good in the 90s and 2000s and into the 2010s. Football seemed to have insulated itself from the financial crash of 2008 to 2010 somehow. They were turning a blind eye to the mess that we currently have now all these years later, like 18 years later, 17, 18 years later, following the financial crash, the following where we are now. Because I remember this now. Other sports had to take haircuts basically, or not expand as quickly, or had slower wage growth, and they had to think outside the box in how they secured funding and expenditure, and they tightened up salary caps, and they looked at working out different broadcast arrangements, and some sports were more impacted than football. Football, for some reason, has ballooned financially. And I was having a conversation, I can't remember if it was 2024 or 2025. I was getting a train and I was waiting for the train, and I got in a conversation with two people. One of them actually is a member of the House of Lords, ironically, and they had been at a conference. And I'm waiting for a train, and I ended up getting into a conversation about the state of football. I think it was in 2024, just before I did the video on the situation in French football, and then we find out what's happening with Bordeaux and Lyon and their struggles, and how they didn't have a TV deal, and how clubs were basically on the verge of going bust or struggling financially and not able to compete against PSG financially, even Monaco. And so this is nearly 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago. And this is, I think, June, July 20. I was going up to see a friend, and I ended up going to a pub that night, and we watched a bit of the Euros. It's about a year and a half ago. And I got into a conversation while waiting for the train, which was delayed. And then on the train we were going to then change trains. They were actually ironically getting on the same train I was to go to their next location. And I got into a conversation, and I described the situation with football as basically the financial crisis of 2007, 2008 to 2010 and beyond. And I basically said, you take out mortgage lending and bank lending and credit lending, and you put football club and money in the system not being equally distributed, and the mess you get. And I likened it to the subprime mortgage crisis that entered the financial system, the overselling of products or the mis-selling of products, the lack of oversight, the lack of transparency, the poor governance, the regulatory failures, put football or any other sport, but football in this case was the example I was using, but other sports, rugby unions in a similar state. You could argue rugby league's now in a mess. Insert sport here, bang. And the pandemic highlighted and exposed the situation, the economic mismanagement, the lack of transparency. And there you go. Fast forward to 2026. We have reached a situation where clubs are in trouble. When you've got Chelsea announcing the second worst financial losses a football club has ever had, and the worst English football's ever had, even Port Vale, which is including their promotion last year and their cup run, which part of this financial year, announcing losses, I think 9 million. The situation at Morecambe, the situation at Sheffield Wednesday. There's other clubs as well that are teetering on the edge. Hamilton in Scotland is another one. You look across in Europe, Boavista, Setúbal. You look in Italian football, I can't remember which club it is, has just gone belly up. French football with Bordeaux and Lyon and other clubs. Basically, the warning signs flashing that they're in trouble. The club histories I've done, I'm surprised the amount of Swiss clubs that have had problems. I think it's Sampdoria. It might be Genoa. I can't remember. It's one of the clubs in Genoa. I think it might be Sampdoria have gone really belly up. And I was surprised looking at, the football club histories, especially Swiss football. That really stunned me. One of the wealthiest nations in the world with disposable income, how they're in such financial mess. Football fans only care about the big clubs, hence Derby was a concern. Morecambe, no. That's also on the Bury. That was pre-COVID. Macclesfield. Yeah, this is serious stuff, and this is part of the pyramid structure and the health of the game and the development of the game and the depth of talent and the wealth and having a sustainable system and a working system. It's there. It's there for all to see. This is Parma and Chiesa, but I think they ultimately survived. But yeah, they were a bit buggered. I think Chiesa, Hellas Verona are still going, but Chiesa are done. Parma have reformed a couple of times and had their issues. Palermo, another one. There's a lot. It's a mess. It's a mess. It doesn't matter what level of the game you're at. It doesn't matter what league you're in. There are. Parma's the famous one because of the Parmalat scandal, and I've covered that in the Parma history video. Chievo is another one. Oh God, it's not Bologna. It's Brescia. They're the one who Brescia is the famous one that went at the end of last year and folded. And look at the players that played for Brescia over the years, who ultimately had great international success and played for some big clubs. Pirlo, Baggio, Sampdoria, great success. Vialli, Mancini, and others played for Sampdoria in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Great, very successful club. And this has been allowed to happen by just really shockingly bad governance, really poor oversight, corruption, yes, mismanagement, a whole range of things. But you look at UEFA as the regional governing body on top of all the local FAs, the national FAs, UEFA. Financial fair play was flawed, so they come up with the PSR, which has been what clubs are deliberately breaching that by finding workarounds that can cover their losses. They sell their youth teams back to themselves. They sell their stadiums back to themselves, their women's teams. They sell back. They work ways around it with holding company. When all the leagues start to only have a few league winners, fans will. True, yeah. If it starts to become less competitive, unfortunately, leagues like Germany, where there's more fan involvement with the 50+1. Not rule, but it's sort of the unofficial rule, although some clubs like Bayer Leverkusen and Wolfsburg famously, but RB Leipzig's the big one, don't follow that model. When that starts to become the case, when it happens in Germany, that's when I think the rest of Europe will wake up. When it happens in England and Germany, where fans really en masse start to turn their attention to other leagues and other sports, that's when I think action at a domestic and a UEFA level will start happening. So yeah, I think that's when we start seeing, if fans start voting with their feet continent wide, and that's the problem because the ultras, the hardcore, turn up week in, week out. But we saw how fan protests crippled the Super League idea. And there are still those who think, oh, no, we should do this. So, no. What we've got with the Champions League is Super League light. It's not really doing anyone any favours. But when when club owners and club chairmen start seeing ticket sales drop, merchandise sales drop, then things might change. This is what Major League Baseball's finding out, is how uncompetitive a lot of their league is. And that's when we start seeing fan boycotts and reduced ticket sales, not just at a handful of clubs, but across the board. Then then we will start seeing, I think, changes, either spending caps or salary cap, transfer caps. I don't know how you work around it. Overseas player quotas, more domestic players through youth system. We will start seeing some form of change, and other sports do it with salary caps and overseas quotas. Or do I think they fill that stadium in the Championship? Oh God. Leeds kept filling Ellen Road in League One, so there's a possibility they do. I think they do. I think they do. I think if they start reducing the capacity, however, that will be interesting. But there's some big clubs in the Championship. There's Premier League. There's 2 Premier League winners in the Championship. There's I think is it 2 or 3 clubs haven't played in the Premier League in the Championship this season. There's ex-Premier League clubs in League One and League Two. Yeah, I think they can fill it. I think they can. But will they? If and they have a very good chance to get relegated. If they get relegated, can they bounce straight back up? Because Nottingham Forest were still filling, the City ground in League One. So I think Spurs have got a loyal fan base because there's not a lot of Glory supporters following Spurs. Let's be honest with that. That's a generational thing. That's a generational thing. It's an interesting one. It's a very interesting one. Oh yeah, no, they will have to charge less for tickets. They can't charge Premier League prices in the Championship, and we will see what happens. I think is a good way to look at it. But other clubs that have dropped down from the Premier League to the Championship have still had good attendances. Newcastle did it. Leeds were doing it in League One. Their fan base turned up week in, week out. So Bradford City have been doing it in League Two. They've been breaking average attendance records. So if they've got a loyal fan base that's willing to go through the hard times, because from the sounds of it, a lot of them don't want to go through what this season. But Spurs haven't been at that level for a very long time. They've not been outside the top flight for a very long time. So that will be watch this space. But Bradford have been doing it in League Two, where they're packing out, Valley Parade. Leeds did do it in League One when they were at their lowest ebb. Fans kept turning up, regardless of the financial situation. So I believe it's doable if the fans continue to buy in. Newcastle did it when they had their Championship seasons, which they've had a couple, but Newcastle's got a fanatical fan base that will just turn up. Even if they're in League Two, they would still turn up. It was only towards the end of Mike Ashley's ownership that fans started to not turn up the games, and even then it didn't last very long. There was very rarely empty seats at St James's Park. I wouldn't say they were always, but Leeds did, for the most part, sell well. But they didn't always sell out. True, there were fan protests at owners and the running of the club where their fans were boycotting. But when they started to perform again, they started turning up. Nottingham Forest have had their ups and downs, but their fans kept going to games week in, week out for the most part. Again, a very loyal fan base. It will be interesting to see if Spurs go down. If fans continue. Graham, you mean Andrew Abdo, the NRL CEO? Graham Abdo? Who the hell is Graham Abdo? I know Andrew Abdo is the NRL CEO. I reckon with the NRL plan for Super League, if they shrink it to 10 teams, it's not going to work. Yeah, Andrew, I mean, I think that's more meetings. I think there's going to be an announcement around the time of the Challenge Cup final about final NRL investment and what concessions both sides are going to make. That shrinking it to 10 teams is not going to work. Merging teams together is not going to work because of the entrenched fan bases that we have. They've tried merging teams before, it didn't work. So I would think that we're getting close to final deal negotiations and an announcement on the future of the game. There's new TV deals up in 2027. To shrink the league, you're not going to get the TV deal you want. You want to grow the league. So I think that 10-team proposal doesn't fly. I think merging teams together doesn't fly. You want to sell as many games as possible to broadcasters. I think the London Broncos will be bumped up to Super League. You could argue Widnes, as a historical club, end up in Super League as well. The question mark is over Huddersfield and whether they can remain a Super League club because they're all over the place. But I think an announcement over NRL investment is in the pipeline very shortly. My way to fix the problems rugby league is having. That's just threats for the owners to give up their self-interest and allow the NRL to run the game. That's a negotiation tactic. Mergers have been proposed before. They have happened before. They haven't worked. The NRL needs to know that, I think we lose. I think Magic Round stays. I don't know where they play it in the future. I think the loop fixtures go. That they won't have loop fixtures, and they're going to want to have an even team league for the TV deal, so no one has a bye week. What that then means for the Challenge Cup, we will see, and whether that means the Super League goes back to a winter league, we will see as well. I think that would work best in order to keep the Challenge Cup and make the Challenge Cup and the Super League Grand Final sort of happen roughly at the end of the season, rather than the Challenge Cup being mid-season and the Super League Grand Final being end of season. I would say they've got to keep Magic Round. I would ultimately choose a city for Magic Round and keep the same city, be it Newcastle or Liverpool, and take Magic Round to a non-traditional location to grow the sport. I think St James's Park works beautifully. I think the Hill Dickinson, the new Everton Stadium, also works quite well. I think but St James's Park works better because there's more amenities, there's more infrastructure around it, there's more places to eat, drink, hotel space, whereas Hill Dickinson, the public transport isn't there yet. It's in a very industrial area, and so it's out of the way, whereas St James's Park is city centre, heartbeat of Newcastle. It's there, it's more accessible. But St James's Park is slightly smaller than the Hill Dickinson for capacity, so there is that to weigh up. But I think St James's Park works better for Magic Round because of its location in Newcastle. That's as a stadium, it's a fantastic modern stadium in Everton's new stadium, but location, not in the best location until further development in that area of Liverpool for nightlife, pubs, bars, hotels, transportation is up to speed. The Merseyrail I don't think Merseyrail has a stop nearby. If it does, it's a fair walk. Whereas Newcastle, the Tyne-Wear Metro is there, city centre, the main station. It's a completely different. Is there plans to build a big transport link? I would hope so. I would hope so. I'm not an expert on the Merseyrail network, but I don't think the nearest Merseyrail stop or even mainline stop is very close to it. Whereas in Newcastle, the Tyne-Wear Metro and the main station in Newcastle Central, are right on top of the stadium pretty much. It's right in the city centre, whereas the Hill Dickinson Stadium is in the arse end of Liverpool. So there are plans to develop that area of Liverpool and put a lot of infrastructure in there, and housing and hotel space and nightlife and cafes and bars and I wouldn't say gentrify, but do a lot of development. I just don't know if there's a Merseyrail stop nearby or a mainline stop nearby train station. That's I think what's holding that stadium back a little bit is transport infrastructure. One of the reasons why Green Park Station in Reading has been built is it's links to the football stadium. They were complaining for years that the Medeski, now the Select Car Leasing Stadium, was not. Yes, there's a park and ride facility, but it is on a bus route, but wasn't on a mainline train station. They built a brand new train station, which has been talked about for many years. They finally got round to building one. It opened a year or so ago to make it easier for fans to get to the stadium. So I would hope that Merseyside, I think, is it Merseyside Council and the City Council and the local transport infrastructure improves there, because it's a fantastic stadium. It's just not easy to get to by public transport unless they really put more bus routes on until other infrastructure is up to speed. Whereas I say Newcastle, better transport infrastructure in the city of Newcastle. I wouldn't say free buses, but at least get a bus route up and running on match day, a match day bus route, just something. And if they're going to have Magic Weekend, just something. They need to improve the infrastructure around the stadium with hotel space, restaurants, just like a commercial development. This is what we're seeing with a lot of stadiums. This is why Milton Keynes, where Stadium NK is, it's an industrial estate. There's nothing to do around. There's no like stadium district where you've got hotel space, restaurants, cafes, bars, pubs. It's just, we'll put a stadium in an industrial estate. There's nothing to do around the stadium. And I think, or at least when they're building the stadium, also upgrade the transport links as well. This is why Stratford International, which is obviously the underground and main line, was done before the Olympic Stadium. They were doing that as well as they were upgrading the transport infrastructure. Wembley, they've upgraded the transport infrastructure. Twickenham, there's a reason why Twickenham's really easy to get to. It's on a mainline station. I've seen 2 people walk around Liverpool once, non-match day, of course, one red and one blue top. Yeah, Liverpool and Merseyside in general is a bit less tribal in regards to the city being blue and red. And the irony is, all the football stadiums, apart from Tranmere in Merseyside, were all built by Everton. Anfield, Goodison and Hill Dickinson are all Everton stadiums, historically. Liverpool just happens to be in one of them. That's irony for you. Prenton Park is the only football stadium of a Football League club in Merseyside which wasn't built by Everton. Although Everton's most famous ever player, Dixie Dean, used to play for Tranmere. So Everton has that imprint on the city historically when it comes to football. The irony of that. No, it was Yeah, so basically, Everton Football Club played at Anfield. They built Goodison, and they wanted to figure out a tenant. Liverpool come along, and ultimately Liverpool. It's a long story, but ultimately Liverpool end up at Anfield, and Everton move across Stanley Park to Goodison, and that's how the story goes. Everton built Goodison. They wanted to move stadiums. They wanted to keep Anfield and rent it to someone. I don't know how it happened, but then Liverpool gets set up. But there was a rent dispute with tenants, who was going to play there or rent the site, develop the site, or buy it off Everton. Ultimately, Liverpool Football Club gets formed. They choose Anfield, and Everton move into their new ground at Goodison, the Old Lady, and ultimately Everton leave Goodison and go to the Hill Dickinson, and the three biggest stadiums in Liverpool are Everton stadiums, ironically. You could not make that irony up. That's what's ironic about it. But yeah, the stadium rent dispute. Yes, Everton couldn't find it. I'm going to have to check the history of Anfield Stadium. I did this for the club history videos, which are when I did Liverpool and Everton, and Anfield comes up, and it's a big part of why you have Stanley Park and the two stadiums. It's really, really interesting, the history behind it. I'm going to have to check it now. I'm just going to look at the. I'm just going to read up on the history now. I'm just going to look at it. I don't want. I've done the stadium tour. I don't need to do the stadium tour. So Liverpool played there their entire existence. Everton used to play there. Now Everton were founders of the Football League. Prenton Park is an old school stadium. That's basically what Anfield and Goodison would have looked like in style. Anfield Football Stadium is in the area of Anfield, Liverpool. It's been the home of Liverpool since 1892. Current capacity of 61,276. It's the fifth largest in England. Everton were the tenants from 1884 to 1891 before they moved to Goodison Park after a dispute with the club president. Now, history. So, it's been gone through multiple renovations. The stadium has four stands. The Spion Kop, which is named after a battle in one of the Boer Wars, actually. The main stand, the Caldy to Kenny Dalglish and the Anfield Road end. The record was set in 1952, 61,905. Wolves and Liverpool played a game. Wolves were the big side in England at the time. They were winning everything. It was converted all-seater in 94, which reduced the capacity at the time. I went to Anfield in 96 when they were extending the away end. Shankly and Paisley have got statues outside. It's 2 miles from Liverpool Lime Street. The best way to get there is taxi, actually. It's the quickest way. It was proposed 2002 for Liverpool to relocate to a stadium in the adjacent Stanley Park. But after Fenway Sports Group bought it in 2010, they said this would not happen. They would expand Anfield instead, which they did. Now, the stadium is named after the surrounding area of Anfield. The word originates a field on a slope, which is true. There is a slight slope there. Anfield and its deviations have been associated to 1642. It opened in 1884. It was owned by John Orrell, a minor landowner who was a friend of Everton member John Holding. Everton, who previously played at Priory Road, were in need of a new venue owing to the noise produced by the crowd on match days. Orrell lent the pitch to the club in exchange for a small rent. The first match at the ground was between Everton and Earlstown on the 28th of September 1884. Everton win their first game at Anfield 5-0. During the time at the stadium for Everton, stands were built for 8,000 plus spectators regularly attending matches, although 20,000 could enter the stadium occasionally. The ground was considered of international standard at the time, So the British Home Championship between England and Ireland was played there in 1889. And the first league match was on the 8th of September 1888 between Everton and Accrington Football Club. Everton quickly improved as a team, and they were the first league champions of the 1890-1891 season, so even before Liverpool were formed. Now, 1892, negotiations to purchase the land at Anfield from Orrell escalated into a dispute between Holding and the Everton Committee over how the club was run. Events culminating in their move to Goodison Park. Holding was left with an empty stadium and decided to form a new club to occupy it, hence Liverpool and the team was called Liverpool FC and Athletic Grounds Limited. And the club's first match was a friendly played in front of 200 people on the 1st of September 1892 against Rotherham Town. Liverpool won 7-1. Liverpool's first Football League match was on the 9th of September 1893 against Lincoln City. And they won 4-0 in front of 5,000 spectators. Another stand was built in 1895, which is now the main stand. And the rest is history. So, basically John Holding and John Orrell and the Everton boards and about rent and dispute over the stadium and what should happen. So there we go. So that's Rotherham and Lincoln City. Very interesting. They have a history with Anfield with those matches as well. I just find it really interesting that it was ultimately a dispute over tenancy agreement and such. But these are the so yeah. It's interesting to see how that all came about, and the fact that it weren't even, and that was Everton's second stadium. Goodison was their third. So technically, the Hill Dickinson's their fourth stadium. Everton, the fact that Everton, that also contributes to their historical success. The fact that they've gone through some very lean periods since the mid-90s, and they battled relegation on more than one occasion, and they've been less consistent with their league finishing position is quite notable. But yeah, the fact that they've been the most consistent team in regards to top flight matches and it's stunning. It is. People don't realise just how metronomical Everton have been, and you look at the fact that they haven't won the league for donkeys over 40 years. But then you look at the fact that they've just been so consistent season after season, a regular, top flight club, very rarely outside the top half of the league as well. It's only been in since the mid-90s that they've been in some relegation scraps, like 98, for example, the last few seasons until this year. It's very notable that they're generally a top half side. They're consistent. Historically, they've won a lot of trophies, although obviously that success has dried up in the Bill Kenwright era and beyond. And the fact they've only had 4 seasons since the foundation of the Football League outside the top flight, since the second division was brought in with the merger with the Football Alliance, that's stunning. It is stunning, the consistency, the historical success, and the fact that they are part of the furniture, it seems. Whether that continues long term, we will see. They seem to have turned a corner this season. They're pointing in the right direction. We'll see what happens with Everton. Spurs, on the other hand, another team that's had a very long top flight existence since their last time outside the top flight. That's a bit more precarious. I don't know when Spurs will last in the second tier, but it's looking more precarious for Spurs. They've got that big, shiny, reasonably new stadium. It's obviously they've been in that stadium now for a few seasons, but I do worry that if they do get relegated, they could implode as a club and really struggle for a very long time. A very long time. I do worry about Spurs. If they were to slip out the top flight, I think that would be absolutely disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. I do generally mean that. And whether that does happen, we will see. We'll see if that does happen. But if it does, I would reckon that would be catastrophic. It would make the problems that Leeds had in their wilderness years, or Nottingham Forest had, look like nothing. And Forest and Leeds had some dark days as low as League One. But if Spurs were to end up slipping out, I think it'd be far more catastrophic than what Leeds went through and what Nottingham Forest went through, or Sheffield Wednesday, what they're going through right now. And they've had a lot of struggles over the last 2.5 decades. Coventry, I reckon it would be far more catastrophic. Far more catastrophic. And the damage would be longer lasting as well. I don't think they've ever been. No, West Ham haven't either. Neither have Newcastle. There are some clubs that have not been past the third tier, but I would hazard a guess that if Spurs were to go down, they could implode, and then we'll see how loyal the fan base is when they are struggling. And these are all hypothetical questions, but this is the risks you take when what is the culture of the club? What the club stands for, the style of play, development of players. They buy a lot of players in. They don't seem to be producing through the academy. That's very noticeable. There's a lack of academy products there, in regards to building a core of players that bring up together. Like the class of '92 at Manchester United, Liverpool consistently good academy, Everton good academy, where academy products make the first team. Now, whether they stick around the first team is another thing. Crewe Alexandra, famous for their academy system and giving players a chance. But I look at Tottenham, I worry. Arsenal have got a decent academy system and a good scouting system. Southampton, very good academy system. I look at all these clubs around English football that have brought players through their own system and then added additional players to strengthen a squad and build an identity. Spurs, I'm not sure what the identity is at Spurs. I generally don't know what the identity is and the direction this club is taking. And if they get relegated, they're going to have to lean on that academy system. They are going to have to lean on that academy system. A lot of clubs have invested a lot of money in their academy systems. I do worry that if it happens that there was a lad I went to school with who was in the same academy team as Gareth Bale. There was a lad I went to school with who was in the Southampton academy at the same time as Gareth Bale. Was he a year above? I think he was a year above me, but he was in the academy system at that time. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he actually made it as a professional. I don't know, or if was he released and ended up in the non-league. I can't remember his name, but I remember he was in the academy system there. It'd be interesting to look at the academy at Southampton in around 2004, 2005, 2006. That's when this lad was in the academy at the time. That'd be very interesting to just have a look at the names of the academy squad, and one of them might go, I recognise that name. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I went to school with him. He was a year above me. Bale is 36 now. So yeah, this lad would be 37, 38 now. Bale's the same age as me. I would have to dig up. You would have to look at the other players in his academy squad at that time. Because this is the time when Theo Walcott is playing at Southampton as well, before he goes to Arsenal. Now, so Theo Walcott debuts, was it the year before Gareth Bale? And he goes to Arsenal, Bale goes to Tottenham. And the rest, they say, is history. Theo Walcott is a few months older than me. Gareth Bale, I think, is a few months younger than me. But this lad who was in the academy with them is the year above me at school. So he'd be 37, 38. So he would have been in the same team. So it would be very, very, very interesting. Yeah, they're the year above me at school because the school year starts September the 1st. So they would technically be the year above me. So yeah, the lad who was the year above me at school would have been in their side, and I would recognise his name if I saw it. He would have been their academy teammate. In that academy team. Now I remember Theo Walcott debuts before Gareth Bale. I think it's either a season or before. He debuted for Southampton the year before Bale, I seem to remember, because he was in the World Cup squad that went to Germany. And that was his debut season for Southampton. And people was basically, the media was saying to Sven, you've got to play this guy at the World Cup because the opposition wouldn't have scouted him. He's the unknown. He's a joker in the pack. He's get him on the field. So yeah, Gareth Bale's the year above me at school, but only just by a month and a bit. I'm born in the December, so he's 6 months older than me, 5 months older than me. Theo Walcott's born in the August, so he's again just the year above me in school. And we're talking by months. So while they're the year above, they're born the summer, I'm born in the winter. That's how nuanced it is when it comes to school year. It's ridiculous, really. So that's interesting that I'm born the same year as Bale and Walcott. How it's transpired. And they're both now retired from playing football. Weird, that, isn't it? Slovakia at the Lane Stadium. It was just a free kick. He was 16. You can see the goal. Oh God! Then we're going back 20 years. 20 years ago. It's mad how the last 2 decades have flown by. Like I left school 20 years ago this summer in June. I think my last day at school was June 24th because that was my last exam. I left school on June the 24th, 2006. It's now April 5th, 2026. I left school 20 years ago. That is insane. That is absolutely insane. So that means Theo Walcott would have debuted before Gareth Bale. So that defeat to Slovakia would have been in qualifying for Euro 2008 because Theo Walcott had already been selected for England by that point and a debut. So that would have been the 2006-2007 season. That would have happened. So yeah, that's mad. It's mad. It's insane. And then of course he earns transfer to Spurs. Walcott goes to Arsenal, and they come from the same academy team, played both for Southampton, and end up being rivals on the pitch for Spurs and Arsenal in the North London derby. Could not make that up. Be interesting to know if they're friends or not, because that would be interesting if they are actually, still friends with each other. Because you don't always get on with everyone. That's noticeable. So that'd be really interesting if they actually still get on, or if they ever got on. It'd be very interesting because they play because Gareth Bale, when he starts as a wing back, whereas Walcott started as a winger, and they sort of end up playing the same role at club level later on in their careers. Their careers evolved, their positions evolved, because Bale couldn't defend. And every time he played for Tottenham as left back, starting left back, they lost. They had a terrible record with Gareth Bale starting at left back. Couldn't win a game, so they moved him to the wing. It's amazing how far Wales have come as a footballing nation. That has been discussed. It's amazing how far they've come. I think that in itself is quite interesting. But again, you've got that Aaron Ramsey comes along a few. I think, is Aaron Ramsey the same age as Gareth Bale, or is he younger? Joe Allen, and they were late bloomers because they were playing for less fashionable clubs. They weren't, in an English club. They were playing in the Welsh system with Swansea and Cardiff. I'm not sure if Joe Allen came through the Swansea system. I know he played for them. But there is definitely, Southampton, that. Yes, Aaron Ramsey's younger than Bale. He seems older to me. Aaron Ramsey seems older to me, but he did have a lot of injuries early on in his career where Bale and Walcott didn't have those injuries early on in their career, which probably, hampered his development a little bit. You could argue hampered his development a little bit, which is unfortunate. So yeah, it's interesting how the last 2 decades have flown by. Like, you've got Ross Barkley. What's happened to him? He's sort of faded off a little bit. There's loads of players who came through. Wow. So that would have been, what year was that? 2008 against Portsmouth? Wow. 18 years ago. That's insane. That is insane. That is just mad. It feels like yesterday that FA Cup final was the first one at the new Wembley, I seem to remember, because Wembley Stadium opened in the June or July, and there was an international friendly under 21s that was played. So I believe that was the first new Wembley final, which was Portsmouth Cardiff, which is also a bit mad. That is just mad. That is insane. And the first Challenge Cup final played at the new Wembley was Catalan Dragons. Was their first final. Then 10 years later, they won it in 2018. And Southampton could make the final. Southampton could make the final 18 years later if they win their semi-final. That is just insane how time has flown by. It seems like yesterday. Sven was England manager, and we had this golden generation of players, and it'll be interesting. It will be interesting if they do. They're doing all right in the league. There's still a chance they could fight for playoffs. They brought a lot to the history of the competition. I think they've underachieved as a club historically, but I think they add something when they're, especially the rivalry between Southampton and Portsmouth, I think adds something to English football. I think what we've got at the moment, I think the product's a little bit sterile. As I say, I think the quality is not as good as what it was 20 years ago. I stand by that statement. I continue to stand by that statement. I think we're over-coaching players. We're coaching too much by analytics and data and sports science rather than, actual individual coach and player developing a good working relationship. And we've lost a bit of those. Sometimes you need old school. And I think Tony Pulis sums it up, whereby, I forget the quote he made, but he was giving an interview and he goes, I didn't coach with all these modern... I had 30 years of scouting experience and knowledge of working with each individual player. And Southampton Pompey's got the bigger fan base. Christ. Pompey's had the more success, but Southampton's a bigger city, so I think they're about the same. I think there's definitely a hatred there. Portsmouth more silverware. Southampton more seasons in recent memory at a higher level. There you go. There's a way to look at it. Fan base. How do you qualify size of fan base? Like, because both sides have been lacking success in the modern era. I think Southampton's the bigger population size. Portsmouth's the more historical one with city status. But I would argue Southampton have got the bigger population base to potentially have fans. Portsmouth have the historical number of trophies over Southampton. Portsmouth have won more silverware, so. But Southampton have a better academy system than Portsmouth. They develop more of their players in house than Portsmouth historically. So it's a good battle there, but it's a good rivalry. But Bournemouth at the moment have Bournemouth and Brighton out on the south coast have the bragging rights at the moment. But Portsmouth and Southampton have all the success when it comes to historical trophy victories. So the south coast is a little football hotbed at the moment, isn't it? Liverpool decided, we'll pinch some of Southampton's better players, ironically. I'm surprised Tottenham, with the Pochettino link, didn't decide to look a bit more at Southampton. When Pochettino went over and go, well, I know these players, I'm going to pinch them. But I think Spurs were penny pinching for the stadium. And you could argue, and Inick, when they took over, and Joe Lewis and Daniel Levy, they wanted to profit out of Spurs. They weren't football people, they were businessmen. And they saw a chance to turn a profit. Brighton have definitely started to develop a good system down there. And they do recruit well. They've got a good structure of player retention, player recruitment, player development. They've established themselves now. They're very solid in the top flight. There's some well-run clubs. There are some well-run clubs. And then there's some badly run clubs and mismanaged clubs. And it just goes to show what putting the right structures in place, right recruitment, the right people in the right positions can do, and investing money wisely over not investing the money wisely and not recruiting wisely. And well, Brighton and Palace, it's to do with one of the chairmen slagging off the other chairman in the 70s, I believe. I think there was something to do with the two chairmen at the time. Something happened at one of the games. Some comments were said in the press, I believe. And it sort of went from there. It's the best way. There is a reason why, and it's to do with the two club chairmen at the time. I believe in the 70s, there was one of them gave an interview, and it was very derogatory about the other one, and then I believe it was it a local radio station or local newspaper picked up, and then something along those lines, where there was a dislike between the two chairmen. I believe there was some sort of very silly kind of ego trip spat where one of I can't remember if it was the Palace chairman or the Brighton chairman slagged off the other one. Something to do with the managers not getting. There was something like that in the administration side, and it sort of went from a personal rivalry between the two chairmen to an actual we don't like each other. To what it's now become. But you could argue Palace has had the success by winning the FA Cup last season, whereas Brighton have had the stability in recent years. Although Palace have also become stable, both clubs had a lot of instability in the 80s and 90s, and now Palace have had a lot of FA Cup finals. Could argue they've been to a few FA Cup finals, and Brighton and Palace are now both stably run clubs. Although you could argue Palace not backing the manager and losing some of their best players and a bit of a slip back this season. They're still in Europe, mind they can still win the Conference League. Brighton wanting to get that first major honour. Also being around European contention. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting rivalry, but they're also Brighton are geographically isolated from the other South Coast clubs like Portsmouth, Hampton, and Bournemouth are all very close together. Brighton are not close together, if that makes sense. And so that's the nearest professional club historically to them was Palace because of the South London aspect and the M23 to Gatwick. It's called the Gatwick Derby for a reason. West Ham are playing today, and Leeds are winning 2-1 against West Ham. Oh, goals gone in. West Ham have scored, but it's. I think Leeds are going to hold on here. It's 2-1 to Leeds over West Ham. It's getting tasty there. I think West Ham need to win that game just for morale purposes. Right. Millwall are threatening promotion. And that could be interesting if West Ham stay up and Millwall get promoted. I think the Metropolitan Police will have a breakdown and the matchday commander will resign on the spot. I'm going to call that a stream. Some really interesting questions. Happy Easter to everyone, by the way. Hopefully everyone enjoys the rest of the bank holiday weekend. But Leeds are winning 2-1 over West Ham. And that's also a bit of a relegation fight as well. That's a statement. If Leeds win that is a statement when it comes to the relegation battle and who's going to stay up and who's going to go down. But that's an FA Cup tie. That's big. That's big if Leeds have an opportunity to be an underdog. Man City are favourites for the cup now, but Chelsea are still in there. Leeds look likely to be in there, and Southampton are the joker in the pack. And if Leeds have a chance to win some silverware. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. Appreciate all the questions. And I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon. Bye for now.